few years back, on Halloween when I was a freshman in high school, my best friend George came over to hang out. My mother is a nurse and was working night shifts at the time, so we were home alone. I made us a frozen pizza and we played some video games while trick-or-treaters would ring the doorbell every so often. The neighborhood I lived in was decently busy, so my mother left a big bowl of candy for us to pass out. We pretty much did just those things until the trick-or-treaters stopped at around 10 p.m. At that point, I turned off all the lights in the house, made some popcorn, and put on a scary movie. We watched it, and afterwards we weren't tired yet, so we decided to put on another scary film. At about midnight, shortly into the second film, I heard the bush behind the living room window moving and a scratch against the window. I'm not gonna lie, it really freaked me out. I told myself I was just paranoid, but then George said, "What was that?" and looked at me. I looked to the window, but it was too dark to really see anything, and had blinds covering up a good portion of it. I said it was probably nothing, and we focused our attention back on the TV. 10 minutes later, just when I was forgetting about all the noise, we heard something else. This time, it was the sound of tapping on the back window of the house. I said once again that it was probably nothing, but me and George were both pretty freaked out. We paused the movie and walked over to the kitchen area, which is where the noise came from, and glanced out the window. It was dark, but we saw nothing, so we went back into the living room. We unpaused the movie, but this time I was more freaked out than before, and I was feeling very paranoid. A couple of minutes later, we heard the sound of glass being shattered coming from the kitchen. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. Without hesitation, me and George both ran downstairs into the basement bathroom and locked the door. We didn't know exactly what had happened, but we figured that somebody broke into the house. George took out his phone and we called the police. They said they would arrive within 10 minutes, and they stayed on the line with us. The lady on the line told us to remain calm, but it was pretty tough. We heard a couple of doors open upstairs, and sometimes would hear footsteps, but other than that we really couldn't hear anything. Then we heard the door to the basement open. We didn't hear anything after that, but me and George were definitely not going to open the door in fear that somebody was down there with us. We just sat there on the bathroom floor, trying not to make a sound, and waited. The wait felt like such a long time, and finally we heard a knocking on the front door and somebody announced they were police. On the count of 3, George and I both made a run for it upstairs and to the front door. Once we were there, we went outside and spoke to a couple of officers, while other officers searched our house. The man was gone though, and a few things were messed up and stolen inside. My mother returned home shortly after that, and George's parents came and picked him up. It was the scariest Halloween for sure. Last Halloween, my sister and I threw a Halloween party at our house. We were both fairly popular college girls, and we knew there would be a lot of people to come to the party. We decorated our place up a little bit, and then put on our costumes. Our close friends were the first people to show up at about 5 p.m., and then slowly more and more people came. Eventually, our house had about 100 college kids in it, all wearing costumes. It was a pretty fun time, until one of my friends came up to me and complained about a man dressed up in an Albert Einstein costume who was annoying some of the girls. I looked around the room until I saw the guy. He was wearing a full mask, so I had no clue as to who he was. He was standing in the corner of the room, so I walked over to him. He looked at me, and I asked who he was. He didn't answer at all and didn't say a word. It was pretty loud in there, so I walked into the kitchen, which was empty, and he followed me in. I told him some people were complaining about him and asked him again who he was. He still just stood there and didn't say anything. Then I told him he should leave. I wasn't sure if it was one of my friends trying to be funny or just a random kid. Then he started to approach me and got very close. I felt uncomfortable and I left the room to get my friend Jack. I told him about the guy and asked if he knew who he was. Jack said he didn't know him at all. We both went back to see if we could find the Einstein guy, but he seemed to be gone. We looked around a little bit, but didn't see him anywhere, so we figured he left, and I was very relieved. The rest of the party was pretty fun, and people started to leave at about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty tired at that point, and before long, it was just my sister, me, and a few of our close friends at the house. We hung out for a little while, and then I went upstairs to go to bed. I got ready for bed, and then turned out the light and got under the covers. I closed my eyes and was starting to drift off to sleep when I heard my closet door open. I opened my eyes and looked in the direction of my closet. I saw the guy in the Albert Einstein mask coming out of the closet and walking towards me. As he did, he removed his mask. It wasn't a college kid at all. It was a man who looked to be about 40 or 50 years old. He had grayish hair and a scruffy beard. I screamed as loud as I could like a little girl. The man had the creepiest smile on his face that I'd ever seen. When he got to my bed, I got up and ran to the corner of the room. He started to follow after me. I heard my friends coming upstairs at that point. Thankfully, they were still at my house. My friends Jack and Ben ran to the man and pulled him away from me. There was a little bit of a struggle, but they were both easily able to overpower him. They ended up holding him there until the police came. A short while later, the man was arrested. I'm lucky that my friends were still there to help me that night. This story took place 2 years ago. It was Halloween evening at about 6 or 7 p.m., and I was at my house watching TV. As I went to the kitchen to get some food, I noticed a man dressed up with one of those horse head masks on, walking up my driveway. I live a little bit out in the country, and the houses are pretty far apart. Because of this, I have never received a single trick-or-treater the entire 5 years I've been living here, so this really surprised me. In fact, I didn't have any candy in the house at all, because I wasn't expecting anybody. I looked around my kitchen to see if maybe I had something I could give the kid, but I saw nothing. I felt bad, and I decided to just go tell him that I was sorry, but I didn't have anything to give him. As I walked towards my front door, I heard the knob start to turn. It jiggled a bit, and then I heard pressure against the door, as if whoever was there was trying to enter my house. Then I heard him walk away, and I saw him from the window walking through my yard to the side of my house. He no longer seemed like some innocent trick-or-treater. Now I was a little bit concerned. I stepped out of the house and looked around, but he was gone to the side where I couldn't see him. I went back inside and made sure that all of my windows and doors were locked. Then I looked out of some of the windows, but I didn't see anything. After that, I went back to watching TV, but was ready to call the police if I needed to. A few hours went by and nothing happened. Then at about 10 p.m., there was a single doorbell ring at my front door. I slowly walked over to it and looked out the window, but nobody was there. I was beginning to get annoyed, and I opened the door and shouted that if there was any more of this nonsense, I would call the police. Thankfully, nothing else happened for the rest of the night. However, when I woke up the next morning, I looked out my window, and I saw that hanging on a tree branch directly facing my bedroom was the horse face mask that the person had been wearing the night before. It was a pretty creepy thing to see. I used to go trick-or-treating with my siblings or my friends every year when I was little. One year, when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, we got dressed in our costumes and went outside to start trick-or-treating. When I got outside, I noticed that in my next-door neighbor's second-floor window, there was a scary-looking man. It caught my attention because I knew that there was no grown man that lived in that house. The man in the window was wearing a jacket and a hat, but I couldn't really make out any details of his face. He looked pretty creepy, and he seemed to be looking out the window, but not really moving. So after a while, I started to think that it was just a Halloween decoration. I had to admit that it had me fooled, but if it was a decoration, it seemed pretty cool. After looking at it some more, I figured that's what it was, and we went on with our trick-or-treating. We were gone several hours, and I ended up getting lots of candy and then came back home. The man in the window was gone now, but it was pretty late, so I didn't really think anything of it. The next day, I saw my friend who lived in the house, and I asked him about the man in the window, if it was a Halloween decoration that he put up. He looked confused when I asked him, and he said that they didn't put up any decorations and they were gone the night before. I thought he was joking at first, but he maintained that he wasn't there, and he seemed pretty serious about it. It was creepy to think about it after that. This story happened many years ago when I was about 8 years old. I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Bobby. We would often trick-or-treat together and then sleep over at each other's houses afterwards. It was a fun tradition. On this year, we were determined to get as much candy as we possibly could, so after going through my neighborhood, we went farther down the street into another neighborhood. I had never really been over there, but there were a lot more houses, and that meant more candy for us. We went to house after house for hours, and finally it reached about 9 p.m. and more houses had their lights turned off, so we decided to start wrapping it up. We decided to finish the street we were on because there was only one more house left on it. When we got to the front door, we rang the bell. An older man answered it. He smiled at us and said that he hadn't had many trick-or-treaters in a while and had his candy put away. We said that that was okay and started to turn around to leave. The man stopped us and insisted that we should get some candy. He said he had been giving out king-sized candy bars and they were just upstairs in his house. Then he motioned for us to come inside. I felt kind of uncomfortable going in a stranger's house, but he seemed nice and Bobby was already inside, so I followed. We walked into the front door and up the stairs. The man walked behind us. But once we got upstairs, I didn't see any candy. Bobby asked the man where the candy was, and the man replied that he must have misplaced it. Bobby turned around and went back down the stairs and said we were leaving. I was more than happy to see this, and I followed him right out the door. The man asked us to stay, but at this point, he was just seeming creepy, so we left. After that, we walked back to my house and started eating our candy. It was the most candy we had ever gotten. We went in my room and hung out and played some video games. It was a really fun night, until we were playing Madden, and Bobby said, "Remember the old man that made us go in his house?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I see him in the window." I thought Bobby had to be joking, and I laughed. But then he told me he was serious. I looked over and sure enough saw him. The old man wasn't looking at us and seemed to be walking around about 10 feet away from the window. We watched him walk up to the side of our house and look in another window, which was the kitchen. Then he made his way back over to my room, and when he got to our window, we both ducked and ran for the other end of the room. We hid so that we couldn't see the window, but we heard the man pressing his face up against it. We waited in silence for about a minute, and then we both looked at the same time. When we did, we saw the man's face pressed up against the glass looking directly at us. He had a disgusting and creepy smile on his face. Me and Bobby both ran as fast as we could to my parents' room, screaming the whole time. My father came out and we told him everything. He called the police and then went outside. He came back in saying he didn't see anything, and the police arrived shortly after that. We were able to tell the police where the man lived, and he ended up being arrested. I felt much safer after that. When I was a senior in high school, during my last spring semester, I had taken all of the classes that I needed to take, and I had an extra hour during the day that I could use to just study. I had an entire classroom to myself for studying, but I would usually just play games on my phone. It was during my third period, so I couldn't go home early or anything like that, but it was still a nice break for me. One day, I got to my study hour and actually had some homework to do. I began working and went for about 20 minutes until I heard an announcement come over the school intercom. It was an announcement of a lockdown, and everyone was instructed to lock their doors and return to their classrooms if they were not in them. I wasn't quite sure if this was a drill or not at first, so I went over and shut the door. The classroom that I was in a wing of the school that was farthest from the locker commons and cafeteria, so I figured no teachers would come over there or hear anything. So I just went back to my homework. I will admit though, I was slightly scared, but really I thought nothing of it, because in my time at that high school, we had had 2 previous lockdowns, which were basically just false alarms. I was working on my homework when suddenly I heard a knocking at the door. I walked over to the door and saw a kid outside. I opened the door and he told me he had seen a guy in the hallway. The kid seemed to be in a panic, so I let him in the room and we locked the door. The kid explained to me that he went out for a drink of water and saw an older-looking creepy guy walking towards him. The kid wasn't able to get back to his original classroom because he would have to go past the creepy guy. I turned off the lights in the classroom and we both went to the back corner. We sat there in pitch-black silence for several minutes. I whispered over to the kid and asked him what his name was, but he appeared to be gone. Then there was another knocking at the door to the classroom. I was pretty scared at this point, but I slowly got up and walked over to the door. I listened on the other side and heard someone say police. I was shocked. I opened up the door to see several officers. One of them pulled me out of the room immediately. I was as confused as can be, but then I saw them go into the room and a short time later come out with the kid that I had let in. They led him away and they told me that he had been the reason for the lockdown. As it turns out, he was a former student who had graduated 2 years earlier. He had gone to the school and had made several threats against the school, but was seen by a staff member shortly after entering. It really creeped me out knowing I had been alone in a classroom with him. This story happened my senior year of high school, which was about 5 years ago now. That year, they added this new room at the back part of the school. I can't remember the exact name they used for the room, but it was basically just an area with several computers and tables, and it was used for giving students extra help with school or making up tests and things like that. It had been made out of an old abandoned classroom that wasn't used for several years. At this time, I had been out of school for 2 days with an ear infection, and in that time, I missed a math test. When I returned to the math teacher, he allowed me to make up the test during study hall, so I went to that new room to take it. The teacher, Mr. Marcus, didn't want to have to go to the room and watch me take the test, so he let me go by myself and said he trusted me not to cheat. I walked all the way over to the room, which was pretty much on the complete opposite end of the school, and once I got to the room, I sat down and began the test. It wasn't too long of a test, but it was a really important one. Right when I got to the third question, the telephone in the room started ringing. I didn't want to get up and answer it, but I figured it was probably Mr. Marcus. I walked over and picked it up. When I did, I was told we were under a lockdown and there was a suspicious person in the building. I was scared being all by myself back in this room with nobody else there, and there wasn't even a classroom next to me I could go to because this classroom was between 2 locker rooms for the gym, which was also nearby. I did what I was instructed to do and shut the door. As I did, I decided to take a quick look out into the hallway. It was completely empty and quiet as well. I went back in and decided to turn off the lights. I went out of sight of the door and went towards the back. Then I took out my phone and used the screen to give me some light to try to do more questions of the test. However, I couldn't really focus with us being in a lockdown. Suddenly, I heard the door to the room that I was in open. It was at that moment that I remembered I hadn't locked the door. Quickly, I ducked down underneath the table that I was at. I could see just barely from under the table a small amount of light coming in from the doorway and saw boots on the ground. At least they appeared to be boots, as I couldn't really see much. I was terrified, and I held my breath so that I wouldn't make a sound. Whoever was in there stood in the doorway for a while, and then the door shut. I barely heard footsteps walking into the room. I was literally shaking, trying not to make a sound. The room then went completely silent and remained that way. I slowly breathed in and out as quietly as I could. I was expecting at any moment to feel someone grab me from behind or something like that. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of a computer falling off a desk to the ground. Then I heard the noise of a man yelling and screaming. It seemed as though whoever was in this room had gone into a rage and was screaming and smashing things. I opened my eyes and looked over. I still couldn't really see anything, but I could hear where all the noise was coming from, and it was at the opposite end of the classroom to my left. I was terrified and knew I needed to get out of there. The exit was directly in front of me and to the right, and the noises were directly in front of me to the left, so I figured I had to make a run for it. I took a deep breath, and then got out from under the desk and ran as fast as I could, as whoever was in there continued to seemingly destroy things in the room. I ran forward to the door and was just barely able to see where I was going. I stumbled into a chair just before the door, but I was still able to make it out. I heard the man yelling as I left the room and sprinted down the hallway. I ran all the way to the front end of the school, where I saw a police officer. I yelled where the guy was and that he was destroying things. Another officer led me out of the school. After some time, I was able to calm down and they ended up catching the man. I got to go home right after that, and I feel so lucky that I made it out of that room, because obviously whoever was in there was very dangerous. In my freshman year of high school, during the first semester, I had a civics class as my last class of the day. The school that I went to was pretty average size, I would say. I remember the class that I was in had about 20 kids in it. It was a couple of months into the school year at this point, and on this Thursday afternoon, we were all just listening to the teacher go through some announcements, when suddenly the phone in the classroom rang. The teacher, Mrs. Lindstrom, walked over and answered it. Then she hung up and told us all that the school was going under a lockdown. She seemed pretty serious and told us that this was not a drill. She locked her classroom door and then turned out the lights and instructed us to the back end of the classroom. We all got up from our desks and went to the back. There was a lot of whispering going on, but nobody seemed to know why we were under a lockdown. The longer we all sat back there, the more concerned everyone seemed to get, which made me start to worry. I started thinking of all the possibilities of what could be going on. It got really quiet after a while, and at one point we heard footsteps going down the hallway, but we didn't know whose they were. The lockdown went on for probably 30 more minutes before there was another call to the classroom announcing that the lockdown had been ended. We returned to class for the final 15 minutes or so, but the only thing on my mind was what could have caused it. School was dismissed after that, and I left school to get on my bus. When I got outside the school, I noticed several police cars with flashing lights. Everyone was talking about the lockdown, and I heard several rumors about what it was, but it wasn't until later that night where I got the real answer. My friend Robbie, whose mother worked at the school, told me that the lockdown had been caused by a student who claimed to see a strange man wandering the halls. However, after an extensive search of the school, one of the back doors was seen to be open, and it was determined that the man had left. The area was briefly searched, but the man was never found. The next day, when I went back to school, everything seemed to be pretty normal, and by the time I got to third hour, I had forgotten all about what had happened the day before. It was a Friday, so I was pretty much just excited to go to the football game that night. In the middle of my third hour class, which was history, I had to go to the bathroom. I knew the teacher was one of the nicer ones who didn't require a pass or anything, so I just asked and she allowed me to go. I walked down the halls of the bathrooms, which are towards the end. As soon as I opened the door and got inside, I came face to face with a man who I had never seen before. He was wearing a winter hat and had long black hair and a small beard. He looked really surprised to see me. We both stood there staring at each other for a second or two. Then the man came towards me and I turned and ran. I ran back to class. When I got back, I told my teacher what I had seen, and the school once again went on another lockdown. This time we stayed locked down for over an hour. I was terrified, but finally it ended, and afterwards everyone was allowed to go home early. They told us the man had finally been caught, but what I don't understand is how they didn't find him the first time the school was locked down, and what he was doing inside there in the first place. This happened just a couple of weeks ago when I went to Walmart one night. I think it was about 8 o'clock, and I went there to only get a few things. When I got inside the store, it seemed pretty normal to me. It wasn't too busy, and it wasn't completely dead either. I didn't waste any time and started walking to the right. The first thing on my list was to get some more soap. As I was walking down that way, I remember seeing a man walking in the opposite direction. He was wearing a shirt that said "human mammal" on it. I specifically remember seeing that. But afterwards, I passed him by and kept walking. After getting the soap, I then headed towards the back end of the store. I was over there getting the last several items, and it took me a little bit over 5 minutes. Then I headed back towards the front end of the store. When I made it a little more than halfway to the front, that particular area was very quiet. But there was one person there, and they caught my attention. It was the man that I had seen earlier, and he was standing in a random aisle, just pushing things off the shelf. It was like he was trying to make a mess. The man had slightly long dark hair, was somewhat big, and a little bit less than 6 feet tall. When I saw him doing this, I couldn't help but look. I was going to just keep walking past him, but when I got kind of close to him, I stopped. The man looked at me as he continued throwing things on the floor. I asked him what he was doing. I didn't say it in a way as if I worked at Walmart or as if I was mad at him. I was just genuinely curious. The man looked at me as I spoke, but did not stop his actions. After my question, he looked away and completely ignored me. I looked around and did not see any employees in the immediate area. When I looked back to the man, he was giving me the middle finger. I thought about saying something to the guy, but decided not to and just walked away. Somebody would see what he was doing soon enough, and he would probably get kicked out of the store or banned. I walked the rest of the way over to the self-checkouts. Then I checked out and started to leave. Well, I guess as I was checking out, the man in the human mammal shirt walked over to me without me knowing, because as soon as I was walking into the parking lot, I looked back and saw the guy walking behind me. He was like 50 feet back, and at first, I wasn't sure if he just happened to be leaving at the same time as me or not. I don't even know why I decided to look behind me, but I'm glad that I did. The guy appeared to be looking right at me, which was strange, but I ignored it. I continued as normal and got to my car, unlocked it, and went inside. I wasn't in a rush to leave or anything, but when I started the engine and was getting ready to back out, I saw him. The human mammal had followed me all the way to my car and was now standing right behind it. He was looking at me through the rear window of my vehicle. I waited for about a minute and he didn't move at all. Then I rolled down my window and yelled to the guy, asking him to move. He ignored me completely. He just stood there with barely any expression on his face. This guy was really confusing to me. I honked my horn and he still didn't move. So then I turned my engine off and got out of my car. At first, the man still didn't move. I asked him what his problem was and he still ignored me. I wasn't really sure what to do. I didn't want to get in the guy's face or anything because he seemed sort of unpredictable. I decided to walk back inside Walmart. As I went through the parking lot, the man calmly walked behind me, following me yet again. By the time I made it to the doors, he was maybe 10 feet behind me. When I walked inside, I wasn't really sure where to go, so I just started walking. But when I made it sort of past the self-checkouts, I saw a few employees standing around. The man behind me was still about 10 feet back, and one of the employees approached him. He tried to walk past, but another employee walked in front of him. I heard that they were confronting him about throwing things off the shelves of the aisles. Somebody must have seen him, or possibly he was seen on security cameras. This allowed me to get away from the guy, and I turned around and left the store while he was still there. This time, he wasn't able to follow me. I left and haven't seen him since. Hopefully he was banned from the store or something. I'm really not sure why he did all of that. It was like he was just trying to cause problems. When I was 16 years old, I got my first job working at a Walmart. It was about 10 minutes away from my parents' house where I lived at the time. I was in high school and would work sometimes after classes were over or on weekends. During this time, I did not have a car, and my parents would drive me to and from work. I was hoping to earn enough money from my Walmart job over time to possibly buy a car. A couple of months after I started working there, I had a shift one night. I started at 4 p.m. after school and got off at 9 o'clock. I was a cashier and was at the check lanes for my entire shift. Things pretty much went by as usual. The store was not too busy, and there was really only 2 hours where there were a lot of customers. Other than that, it was fairly quiet. I actually was able to get off a little bit early that night. At about 8:45, my manager told me that I could leave now because things were so quiet. I left the check lanes and went to the employees-only area of our store to clock out. Then I texted my mom, letting her know that I was off early. She knew that I worked until 9, and sometimes I would get off a little bit early or later. My mom replied quickly, letting me know that she would be leaving to come and get me. I left the store and walked to the front of it. There were a few benches looking out to the parking lot on the sidewalk area over there. There were also a couple of small plants and trees as well, scattered around. I sat next to this tree on a bench, where I would often sit and wait for my mom to pick me up if she wasn't there already. I went on my phone and just waited. The parking lot was pretty quiet for the most part by now. It was getting to be a little bit later at night. Still, occasional customers would come inside the store or leave. There were also a lot of cars in the parking lot with all of the employees we had, as well as the customers. I remember seeing this one car, which was a larger and older looking SUV, enter the parking lot. It drove around, and then drove right in front of the entrance doors, which were a little ways to my left. Then it slowly went forward and past me, going to the other set of doors. I watched it go past those doors and take a left, going back through the parking lot. I really didn't think much of it and focused my attention back to my phone. But I remember a couple of minutes later, looking up and seeing the car again. It was back, as if it was taking another lap around the parking lot. It was also moving at a very slow speed. This time, the car came to one of the parking aisles and then turned to go towards me again. It drove along the front of the store and slowed down some more. Then it stopped, literally right in front of me. I had a sort of bad feeling about it for some reason, but I was more confused than anything. This certainly wasn't my mom's car. After the SUV stopped, the passenger side window, which was closer to me, rolled down. Now I could see that there was a man in the driver's seat and he was looking right at me. He then yelled to me, asking if I needed a ride. The man said that he could drive me home or to wherever I was going. I shook my head and told him no thanks. I didn't get a good look at the guy, but I remember that he had sort of dark and long hair and was wearing a baseball cap. He said that I should go with him and waved me over. I still said no, but the man did not drive away. I thought he would leave, but for a few moments he just sat there. Then, suddenly, his driver's door opened up and the man started walking around the car. The next thing I knew, I saw the guy emerge from behind his car, and he was walking right towards me. He was moving at a fast pace, and I quickly got up from the bench. I turned and ran for the entrance of Walmart and didn't look back. I made it inside within probably 10 seconds, and then I finally looked behind me. The man had not followed me into the store. I didn't see him immediately outside either, and figured that he had gone back to his vehicle. I remained inside the store, sitting on an inside bench until my mom texted me that she was there. She arrived about 5 minutes after I had entered the Walmart and let me know that she was in the parking lot out front. I walked out and saw my mom's car and got inside of it. When I did, I felt much better. I told her about what had happened and we looked around. Then I saw the same SUV in the parking lot. This time it was parked in a space and the engine was running. We left and luckily were not followed or anything. I remember that when we got home, I called my boss and reported the incident. I'm not sure if the guy ever came back or anything. For the rest of the time that I worked there, nothing like that happened, and I never saw the guy either. For a little background, I'm a female and live fairly close to several different Walmarts. There was one in particular, though, that I would typically go to because it was the closest to my house. I would say that I went there maybe once a week on average. I did most of my regular shopping there because the prices were cheaper than most other grocery stores. One night, I went there at maybe 8 o'clock or so. I was going around the store and getting a few things. The store was pretty quiet, I remember, and because of that, I noticed that someone seemed to be following me around. I really didn't know exactly when they started, but I walked through about 4 aisles with the same person trailing me. I stopped and looked back. It was a Walmart employee. He was sort of short and had dark brown hair and glasses, and when I looked at him, he kind of stopped. Then I turned and kept going. But shortly after I left the aisle, I saw him again. I couldn't believe it. It was so obvious that he was following me, but I didn't know why. I decided to go to a random aisle sort of far away. He followed me, saying about 30 feet back at least. When I got into an aisle, I stopped there, and he stopped at the end of it. I couldn't take it anymore, so I approached him. I walked to the end of the aisle where he stood, seemingly looking at items on the shelf. He must have been trying to make it look like he was working and not following me. I said to him, "Is there a reason why you were following me around the store?" The guy looked at me all confused and claimed that he wasn't. He said that he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him how he had gone down every aisle that I did for the last 5 minutes at least. He claimed that it must have been a coincidence and said that he was always moving around the store. I just shook my head and walked away. When I did, he didn't follow me. The fact that I confronted him hopefully let him know that I knew what he was doing. I didn't feel like reporting him or anything though. I finished up my shopping and then left without seeing the guy. After this experience, I figured that it wouldn't happen again. After all, I had caught him. But the next time I went to that Walmart, roughly about a week later, it did happen. This time, it was harder to tell. He did a better job of following me while still keeping a distance, but I could still tell that he was following me. I had noticed him not that long after entering the store. I noticed him across the walkway in another aisle. I moved away, hoping that he hadn't seen me yet at all, but I saw him again a short time later, closer to me. When I moved to another aisle just a short time later, I saw him at the end of that aisle. At that point, I decided to just leave. I didn't even bother to buy anything at all. I was pretty creeped out by the guy. He didn't follow me out of the store or anything, and I hoped to not see him again after that. I considered not going back to that Walmart after. The next time that I had to go to the store, I went somewhere else. But several weeks later, I must have forgotten about it, because I went back to the Walmart and was hoping to have a normal shopping trip. I wasn't thinking about the guy until I noticed him again. It was maybe 5 minutes after I had entered the store, and he was walking by about 20 feet away. When I remembered him, I decided to just leave immediately. I would go to the next closest Walmart instead, which was maybe 5 to 10 minutes away. I turned and started walking to head out. When I did, I sensed him walking behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw that he was in fact walking behind me. He was maybe 20 feet back. I went straight for the exits and walked out of the doors. To my surprise, he walked right out of the doors after me. I couldn't believe it. After maybe 10 feet of walking through the parking lot, he was still following me. At that point, I just started running. I sprinted for my car, unlocked it, and got inside. When I did, I looked around for the guy, but I didn't see him at all. I'm not sure exactly where he went, but he could have easily been hiding behind any car in the parking lot or something. I left and went to another store. After that, I did not go back to that Walmart. I called them up and reported what had happened, but I'm not sure how they handled it. I'm not sure what the guy was doing either and why he thought he could always follow me around like that. I've thought a few times that maybe he didn't even work at the Walmart. Maybe he was just wearing the vest. It's possible, but I honestly think that he did work there. When he followed me out of the store, it was really unexpected though. I'm hoping that I never see him again. I used to work at Walmart. I worked there for about 6 months, and I mostly just stocked shelves. I also worked past close often and would work overnights. The job was pretty easy, and I would usually get there at about 10 o'clock at night and work until 6 a.m. The store closed at 11 p.m., so for about an hour I would be working with customers in the store, although generally there were very few of them at that hour. Our particular location was probably one of the quieter ones. We were always hiring and often a little bit short-staffed, even with it being one of the quieter Walmarts. I imagine that some other Walmarts probably have lots more employees than we did. One night, I got to work at 10 o'clock and had some boxes of items to stock shelves with in the grocery area. At around midnight, I was by myself in one of the back grocery aisles. It was mostly quiet in the immediate area where I was. But out of nowhere, I heard something fall off of seemingly one of the top shelves in the next aisle over. I thought this was weird, and I stopped what I was doing to go see. I figured that another coworker was there for some reason. When I walked around the corner and looked into that aisle, I didn't see anybody at all. I went back to what I was doing and continued with work. For the next 10 minutes or so, everything was normal. But then, out of nowhere, I saw this guy walk into my view for just a second. He was passing by my aisle and did not appear to be an employee, but I only saw him for like a second. I got up and walked over. When I looked around the corner, I saw him disappearing into another aisle. I called out asking who was there, but got no response. I decided to go and see who it was. I walked over and into the aisle where the guy went. When I looked down this one though, I didn't see anybody. It was really strange because I didn't hear him leave the aisle. I was sure that he was there. I kept looking down that aisle, and then I saw him. He was hiding within the aisle on the bottom shelf. He was mostly covered by boxes and was about halfway down. I just barely saw his head peeking out between the boxes. It was a really strange sight. I should have just walked away and found my boss, but I decided to call out to the man again and ask him what he was doing. When I did, he did not move or answer me. I told him that he had to leave and we were closed. I don't think this really had much of an effect on him though. He remained hidden, even though I knew where he was, and he also knew that. I left at that point to find my boss. I walked a ways away, and I let him know that there was somebody hiding in one of the aisles. We both walked back over to the aisle where the man was, but when we got there, we were just in time to see him running away. He went sprinting out of the aisle and out of both of our sights. We briefly walked over to where he had gone, but he had been running pretty fast. My boss told me that it would be taken care of, and I could go back to work. As my boss walked away, I heard him radioing in to somebody else, and I felt at ease about the situation. I went back to work after, like usual. I stocked shelves for the next hour and a half or so. But then, as I was over there by myself, I heard a noise of somebody approaching me. I turned around and once again was expecting to see a coworker, but I saw the same guy. Somehow, he was still here. I thought my boss told me he was going to take care of it. The guy startled me, and I got up and immediately started running away. It was the only thing that I could think to do. The crazy part is the man actually started running after me. He gave chase as I ran past several aisles before finding a coworker. When another coworker saw us, the man finally diverted and ran into another direction. At that point, both my coworker and I went in the opposite direction of the guy. The police ended up being called, and a bunch of us employees were evacuated from the store. When the police got there, they went inside and were able to catch the man after probably 10 minutes. I'm not sure how, but the guy had been able to elude everyone for several hours. He stayed in the store after closing, and nobody was able to kick him out. He would hide in the store and move around when nobody was watching him. What his ultimate plan was, I don't know. It really creeped me out though. I'm glad that I saw him when I did. I'm not even sure why he was approaching me. I had a bizarre experience after shopping at Walmart not too long ago. It was a normal afternoon, and I was doing some grocery shopping. I was at my local Walmart, located roughly 10 minutes from my house. The store was pretty busy, with lots of other people shopping. I was inside for at least half an hour, and in one of the grocery aisles. When I was there, a man struck up a conversation with me. The man was probably about 5'8", had glasses, and was bald. He started out saying hi to me, and asked me what I was shopping for. It seemed a little bit strange because he didn't work there and usually other people don't talk to you. The way he spoke was somewhat friendly, but it seemed a little bit odd. I said I was doing some grocery shopping and was almost done. He spoke with me a little bit longer, asking me if I was going home after, and I said yes. I found that question a little bit odd, but the man then told me that he had a lot more shopping to do and started to go over several things that he was buying. I figured that he was just trying to be friendly, and I didn't really mind talking to him, even though it was a little bit awkward. The conversation really only lasted for a couple of minutes. Then I told the guy that I was going to check out after I got the last item, and I said bye to him. He said bye as well, and seemed to walk in another direction. I then went over to the self-checkout area and started scanning all of the items from my cart. It was kind of busy over there, and every other register was occupied by a customer. A line was even starting to form of people after I got there. Within the crowd of people though, when I was almost done checking out, I saw the man who had talked to me. He was in line to check out and behind somebody that was also waiting. He was kind of hard to see, but it was definitely him. It seemed a little bit odd to me because I thought he had told me that he had more shopping to do, but I really didn't think too much of it. I just finished checking out and then left. After leaving the store, I loaded up my groceries into my car and then drove away. Everything went fine, and I got back home about 10 minutes later. I went inside and put everything away. When that was done, maybe 5 minutes after arriving back home, I looked out of the front window. I have a large front window off the dining room on the right side of my house. It looked right out to the driveway and then the street. When I looked out there, I saw a car coming down the street. The neighborhood is usually quiet, and cars driving by is not something that happens every minute. I just casually watched the car drive by, and I didn't know or care who it was. That is, until it turned right into my driveway. This made me really confused. I had no clue as to who it would be. After the car parked, I was still there about 5 feet away from the window, looking out. The door of the car then opened, and I saw the same guy from Walmart get out of it. He then walked right up the driveway to my front door. As he was walking up, I quickly ducked down. I really don't know if he saw me or not, but he proceeded to knock on my door, to which I did not answer. I was too creeped out. He knocked again, and I stayed where I was. I didn't even want to get up, or he might be able to see me. After probably 5 minutes, I hadn't heard anything in a little while, and I got up. I saw that he wasn't at the front door anymore, but then I looked over to the left and realized that he was at another front window. He was looking in, and I ran out of the room. After that, I was ready to call the police if the guy tried to break in or something, but when I went back to look a few minutes later, he was actually gone. His car was also not in my driveway, and I felt much better. I haven't seen him since. I really don't know how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me home without me noticing or something. I'm glad he didn't try breaking in. Why he went to my house in the first place, though, I don't know. One night, in the middle of nowhere, I had a freaky situation happen to me. I was visiting my grandma, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She had a house on the lake, and to get there required driving down a long dirt road for many miles. It wasn't a very popular lake, so she didn't have any neighbors, the closest houses being at least a mile or two away. Because it was such a long drive, whenever I visited, I would just naturally stay the night in her guest bedroom so that I wouldn't have to drive long, tiring hours in the darkness. One night when I was visiting my grandma, I was sitting out on her back patio just hanging out listening to music. It was close to midnight, and my grandma had gone to bed already, so I was just enjoying the nice night air while sitting outside on my phone. Over the sound of my music, I thought I heard something banging or clanking around. There was a steady breeze that night, so I just expected it to be the wind moving something and making noise down by the boathouse. However, as the night continued, I also saw some quick flashes of light from down by the dock and the boathouse, and I knew that somebody had to be messing around down there. I was nervous because I was out in the middle of nowhere and isolated enough that there shouldn't be anybody nearby, let alone looking around down by my grandma's boathouse. I thought about calling the cops, but decided against it because it would take over an hour for them to arrive most likely. Instead, I turned off the music and went inside to grab my grandma's revolver, which I knew she kept loaded. Upon coming back outside the patio, I saw occasional movements of light down by the boathouse, so I decided to confront whoever it was now that I had a weapon. I called out to stop messing around by the dock and to reveal themselves and leave the property. I assumed that whoever it was would simply just leave without revealing who they were, but to my surprise, the figure of a tall, skinny man stepped out onto the dock. Illuminated by the moonlight, all I could see was his figure at first, but as he approached, I saw that it was an older gentleman. He casually began walking up the dock and towards where I was standing on the back patio, as if he had been doing nothing wrong. He didn't say anything as he slowly kept approaching, so I yelled out to stop and leave the property or else I'd shoot. I thought for sure that would be enough warning for him, but he just kept coming up the lawn towards me. I finally took a warning shot right above his head to stop him from advancing. After I had fired the shot, he put up his hands and spoke to me for the first time, saying to take it easy and relax. Fully creeped out by the demeanor of this old skinny man, I told him to leave immediately or I would shoot him. The man stood still for a couple seconds, and I thought that he might start walking towards me again and I'd have to shoot him. However, he turned back and walked out into the woods, back down to the left of the dock, and disappeared. I was worried the rest of the night and didn't get much sleep, half expecting him to come back, but he never did. I'm not sure what his deal was and why he was so comfortable and nonchalant about approaching me while at gunpoint. The following morning, I warned my grandma about it, just in case he ever came around again. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I live in the countryside of Ireland, far from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually pretty quiet, which is nice. Most nights, the only sounds I hear are the occasional cow escaping the field next door or my dog barking at someone walking by. But about 2 years ago, I heard something really strange. It was late spring, and the night sky was clear. I remember stepping into the kitchen around midnight for a snack. As I rummaged through the cupboards, I began to hear noises outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds only grew louder. I opened up the window to listen better, and I saw my dog standing by the back door. She wasn't barking, which was strange because she usually barks at anything, especially animals. Instead, she was focused on the forest behind our house. The noise was hard to describe, but it was like metal being scraped, but it had a croaky quality to it. I didn't like it, and the fact that my dog was scared made me uneasy, because she was a big dog and not easily frightened. I couldn't understand what could be out there, so I decided to bring her inside and go to bed. But as I lay in my room, the sound seemed to follow me. It shifted to the front of the house, which didn't make sense. I shut my curtains, hoping to block out whatever was outside. Just as I got comfortable, I heard a tap on my window. It was soft at first, but then it became a steady tapping noise. It sounded like stones being thrown against the glass. I stayed under the covers, just listening and hoping that it would stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the night to my neighbors. That's when I found out a man had moved into a house just around the corner. They said he wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and he had a history of trouble with the law, so much so that whispers about him being a drug dealer floated around. About a month later, a massive stash of drugs was discovered in a shed nearby, and we never saw that man again after that. Thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that he might have been trying to scare me that night while he was high or something, but it was just all so strange. Like, how did he create that sound for hours, and how did the sound move around the outside of my house so quickly? What unsettled me the most was the thought of what could have happened if I had gone to check on the noise. I'm still not 100% sure of what it was, but it freaked me out. A few years ago, I visited some friends out in Oregon who lived on a secluded 300-acre property in the middle of nowhere. We were deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sounds of nature. On the second evening, we were sitting around a fire pit enjoying each other's company as the sun was setting, making the whole sky orange. There was a total of 6 of us there, and 2 of my friends had brought their kids who were busy making s'mores. The others were having casual conversation, and I was comfortable in my folding chair, leaning back and zoning out, just staring into the darkness. After a while, I noticed something strange. I kept staring at this one particular tree, trying to figure out what I was seeing. After I kept looking at it, I deciphered what looked like a giant hand wrapped around the trunk of the tree. I quickly turned to my friend Anthony, who was sitting closest to me, telling him to take a look at the tree. I motioned with my hand, telling him the direction to look. He also couldn't determine what he was seeing at first, but I told him to just keep looking and focus on it. Finally, he saw what I was seeing and whispered to me, "Is that a hand?" It blended in so well with the bark of the tree, but the more we looked at it, the more certain we were it was a massive hand gripping the tree. The fingers were thick, almost like tree bark. They had ridges and cracks, giving them a rough appearance. It was bizarre, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I felt goosebumps cover my arms as we both stared at the hand. It was about 15 meters away, and it didn't move at all. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The kids were laughing and joking around the fire, and we didn't want to alert anyone else in fear of scaring the kids. After 8 long minutes, the grip of the hand suddenly loosened and disappeared behind the tree into the darkness of the forest. The movement of the hand disappearing confirmed to both Anthony and I that it wasn't an illusion. Anthony and I looked at each other wide-eyed and speechless, feeling that we had seen something that didn't belong in our world. Later that night, we finally got up from our chairs, and we wanted to check out the area where we had seen the hand. We walked towards the tree. When we reached it, we both paused, taking in its massive trunk. It was at least 2 feet in circumference, and it was hard to imagine how something with a hand could be that big. I inspected the ground around the base of the tree, looking for any signs of footprints, scratches, or anything that could explain what we had seen. But there was nothing. No imprints in the dirt, and no smell like you would expect from a wild animal. I've heard tons of stories of man-like creatures residing in the deep woods, and I'm a believer now. Whatever that thing was bigger than any regular human, and based off the size of the tree that its hand was wrapped around, it had to have been huge. This is a true story of something that happened to me and a few friends a couple of decades ago when I was still a teenager. My family had just moved from a big city to a quiet area in England, basically in the middle of nowhere. My new house was half a mile from an old ruin of a castle called Barry Pomeroy. The locals always said that the castle was haunted, but tours of the castle were regularly given during the daytime, so I didn't really believe it. One night, a few of my friends and I thought it would be fun to explore the castle at night. It was around 9 p.m. when we went to check it out. There was still plenty of light to see, but the summer sky was darkening. We walked up the valley, taking the steep footpath to the castle's gatehouse. We knew that we could sneak in pretty easily by climbing over a ruined wall, and at this point, they didn't employ guards yet to keep people from sneaking in at night. Once inside, we moved through the old dining room and climbed the ramparts to take in the views. It was dark by now, and the moonlight cast long shadows everywhere, making it a bit creepy. We were having fun though, and eventually decided to check out the dungeon. As we descended the stone staircase, we noticed tiny candles flickering on the steps. Tours for the day had been finished for many hours now, and the candles were freshly lit. At the bottom, we found what looked like a shrine. There were candles arranged in a circle, and something was drawn on the wall behind it. I don't remember the details of the drawing, but it felt eerie. The candles and the thought of someone else being in the dungeon area made us uneasy, so we quickly went back up the staircase. When we reached the top of the staircase, I realized my friend Alan was missing. I called out his name, and after looking around, we saw a figure walking around on the ramparts. He must have chickened out and never came down to the dungeons, even though we thought he was with us. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. Alan was coming up the stairs after lagging a bit behind and was asking why I was shouting his name. Sure enough, I turned to see Alan standing behind me now. My heart dropped as we looked back up towards the ramparts. The shadowy figure I had seen that I thought was Alan was still up on the ramparts, watching us. It didn't move for a moment, then slowly slipped behind a pillar and vanished. We were all on edge now and decided it was best to leave. We hurried back the way we had gotten in, climbed over the wall and headed towards the footpath through the woods. As we walked, I glanced back at the castle. It loomed in the darkness, and I noticed the figure again. This time, it was perched on top of the wall, moving along it as if it was following us. As quickly as we could, we hurried down the path, trying to keep our footing in the uneven ground. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I looked back again. The castle seemed even more imposing now. This time, when I looked back, I saw a faint blue light glowing on the wall. It drifted slowly, then disappeared over the edge of the castle. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. That was the first and last time I ever experienced something I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just some guy trying to scare us off, but I couldn't shake the image of that blue light fading away. It looked so supernatural, and I began believing that the castle indeed was haunted. When I was about 13, my family lived in a remote area in the middle of nowhere, Canada. One winter night, I decided to unwind in the hot tub on our deck. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and the world was quiet, blanketed in knee-deep snow from a recent snowfall. As I sat there watching the trees and listening to the night sounds, something caught my eye. Emerging from the darkness of the woods was a massive wolf. It was unlike any wolf I had ever seen. Its silver coat shimmered in the moonlight, and its green eyes pierced through the night. The wolf walked along the fence that bordered the property. For a moment, it paused and locked eyes with me. I was up on the deck, and the wolf was far away below, but I was still terrified, and I sat as still as possible, waiting to see what would happen. The wolf continued on its path towards the barn where our horses were kept. As it approached the barn, There was a light on the outside on the other side that illuminated the inside just a bit. The barn was dark inside, but I could clearly see the outline of the wolf moving through the barn. Halfway through the barn, the shape of the wolf totally shifted. It was like it morphed into something more human-like, although it was big with broad-shouldered, and seemed to stand at least 7 feet tall. The horses weren't skittish at all and were completely silent, which was strange. The tall figure rounded the corner, but did not appear on the other side of the barn. I strained to see if it would reemerge from behind the barn at some point, but it never did. It must have just vanished into the darkness on the other side of the barn. I had no idea if there was a trick going on with the light and shadows inside the barn, but I had no idea what I had just seen, and I had never seen a wolf that big. Later, I found that my brother had experienced something similar. He told me that he woke up one night feeling a strange sensation, like he was being watched. When he looked out of his window, he saw the same large wolf walking away from his window. I have yet to see the wolf again, and I wonder if I ever want to.
Something really weird happened a while back. I was at home one night in my apartment. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I think that it was kind of late. I just remember hearing my phone vibrating a ways away from me, and I went over to look. When I did, I saw that I was getting a call, but it was from a random number that I didn't know. It was strange because normally the toll-free calls and telemarketers would be during the day. Out of curiosity, I decided to answer the phone. I'm not really sure why looking back, but I did. When I picked up, I said hello. There was at first just silence on the other end. I said hello again a few seconds later. Then, finally, someone spoke. A man on the other end finally said, "I guess I have the wrong number." I said, "Okay." Then he hung up. I figured that it was an innocent mistake of him just dialing wrong. I didn't think too much of it. The whole thing was a little bit weird, but nothing to be suspicious about. The very next night, it was a similar situation, and I was home by myself, as I live alone in my apartment. This time, I know that it was really late. In fact, I was just about to go to bed, but my phone started ringing again. I had remembered the call from the night before. When I looked, it was once more a number that I didn't have saved. It very well could have been the same number from the previous night, but I didn't definitively recognize it at the time. I answered again and said hello. Once more, there was at first silence, but then I heard a man say hello. I recognized the voice, and it was the same guy from yesterday. I said something like, "Oh, it's you again." I then asked him who he was trying to call. I was wondering who my number was getting confused with. But the guy didn't answer me. Instead, he just asked me what my name was. I gave him my first name, and then he said okay, and then just hung up. I was really confused. The whole thing was pretty strange. I mean, why would he call me again if it was the wrong number? Wouldn't he have learned from his mistake? Not too long after this, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and saw that I had about 10 missed calls on my cell phone. This was really weird. I looked, and they were all from that same number. Why did this guy keep calling me? I also saw that he left one voicemail. Out of curiosity, I decided to play it. When I did, the first thing that I heard was a man breathing. It sounded like he was moving around, maybe walking or something. His breathing into the phone continued for about 10 or 15 seconds, but he didn't say anything. Then I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. It was really loud, like he shattered a window or something like that. The voicemail then abruptly ended. When I heard this, I was super creeped out. Right then and there, I blocked the number. My apartment was fine. He didn't break the windows there because I was on the 5th floor. But nevertheless, I looked around and made sure that everything was fine, which it was. The building was fine too, so I'm not sure what glass he broke. Since then, I haven't heard from the guy. I have received no more strange calls. However, I still wonder who that guy was and what he was doing. This happened many years ago. I was much younger and a single man living on my own. I was out with a friend one night watching the game at a bar. I remember that he had to leave early for whatever reason, so I stayed there by myself because I wanted to see the end of the game. I was sitting at the bar, and towards the end of it, I noticed a woman sitting a few seats down. The bar had not really been that busy. I didn't notice when exactly she got there, but I don't think she was there for the whole game. There were other people around. The bar wasn't dead, but it was not super busy either. The woman seemed to be there by herself, and she was just sitting at the bar drinking something. I found her to be attractive, so I was actually thinking of striking up a conversation with her, but she spoke to me first. She looked over and asked if I had bet money on the game. Admittedly, I had bet the over on the score, and I told her that. We got to talking a little bit, maybe like 20 minutes, and before I knew it, the game was over. I thought that it was a good conversation, and shortly after the game, the woman said that she was going to leave. I decided to ask her for her number, and when I did, without hesitation, she said that I could have it. She told me the number, and then I put it in my phone, and she left. I was feeling good about how things had gone. When I talked to her, I was funny, she was laughing, I asked her questions, and she had asked me questions. It seemed like a really good conversation in my opinion. I was excited to hopefully see her again and text with her. The next day, I did something out of character. I was feeling bold, so I decided to call her instead of just text. The way our conversation had gone, I figured that she would not mind. So I called her number sometime in the late morning. She picked up, and I heard nothing on the other end. So I spoke. I said, "Hello," and I was literally starting to say something else when the phone call just ended. It was like she had hung up. My heart sank. Then, moments later, I got a text. It said, "Who are you?" I replied with my name and said, "We met last night, remember?" In my mind, there was still a sliver of hope in this moment, and I was hanging on to it, even if that sounds pathetic. She texted back saying, "Huh?" Again, my heart sank. I thought to myself, how would she not remember me? I had spoken to her for a long time, and I knew she wasn't drunk. Sure, both of us had had drinks, but I only had 2 the whole night, and I can confirm that she did not even seem drunk at all. So I decided to try to clear things up by calling her again. I felt that I could explain the situation better over speaking and not texting, so I dialed her back. This time she picked up again, except it was not the girl that I had met at the bar. It was some random guy, and he sounded angry. Obviously, I couldn't see the guy, but he sounded large and had a sort of deep and booming voice. Right away, he was angry. I thought for a moment maybe he was the woman's husband or boyfriend. He asked who I was and why I kept bothering him, and asked if I was trying to prank him. He said all this without letting me speak. When he was finally done yelling at me, I told him that I had met a girl at a bar last night and she gave me this number. He started yelling at me again, saying that that was the most unbelievable thing he ever heard and that he will not be harassed and he ought to call the cops on me. Then he said, matter of fact, I should come down and find you and beat you myself. I didn't know why this guy was so angry. I asked him if he knew the woman, and he said no, once more going on an angry rant. This guy was one of the angriest people I've ever spoken to. So what? I called the wrong number. Is that like the crime of the century? I told him I was sorry and that I had the wrong number, and I said I really didn't mean to bother him. He started ranting again, saying I had better leave him alone now. I hung up at that point, cutting him off from another one of his rants. I double-checked the number that I dialed with the number the girl gave me. It was the same. So either she intentionally gave me the wrong number or I wrote it down wrong. Part of me wanted to believe that I just wrote it down wrong, but deep down, I knew the truth. She had given me the wrong number, but it didn't end there. The guy who I called by accident then started texting me. He started spamming me with threatening messages. He was saying how I harassed him and how he was going to find me and hunt me down and get me. After like the 10th text in the span of 2 or 3 minutes, I blocked him. And after that, I didn't get any more of those texts. I went back to the bar a few times over the next several months. I didn't want to see the woman again, but if I did, I was planning to talk to her about giving me the wrong number. However, I never saw her again. I'm still kind of mad about it, but it happens, I guess. For a little background, this happened last year at work. I'm a woman and work in an office building in a pretty typical job. One day, I was bored at work and didn't have a whole lot to do. I got a random phone call kind of out of nowhere. Being bored, I decided to answer it. I did not know who was calling me as the number was not one that I had saved. Everybody who I typically talked to was a contact in my phone. This included friends, family, work people, and really everybody. So this was a little bit strange. When I answered the phone, some random guy said hi to me. I said hi. There was a bit of silence, and then I asked who he was. The man said that he must have the wrong number. I told him no problem. However, he did not hang up the phone. Instead, he started asking me questions. He first asked who I was, and I told him my first name. I thought that would lead to him telling me who he was trying to call. But then he asked me where I was, and I said I was at work. I didn't tell him where I worked or anything. He then asked if I lived in the city that I did live in, and I said yes, still curious. I was wondering why he was asking me these questions. I remember that he asked me a couple of other things, but I interrupted him and said that I was at work and I really couldn't talk. The guy was starting to seem weird. So he said okay, and then I hung up the phone. I went on with work, and he didn't call back or anything. Probably like the next day or so, I got a random friend request on Facebook from somebody who I did not know. It was a guy, and we had 0 mutual friends. I did not accept it, but I also didn't decline it. I wasn't entirely sure if maybe I knew him somehow, but overall I just kind of ignored it. The next night I got a phone call again from the same number. Now I was at home and not at work. I was curious though, so I decided to answer. When I did, it was the same guy. He told me that he sent me a friend request on Facebook. In the call, he was acting super friendly and nice and told me to accept it. I went on Facebook and did so, I'm not sure why. He started making chit-chat, but I cut it short and said that I had to be going. After ending the call, I went on the guy's Facebook page and looked at it. He seemed pretty weird. The more I looked at it, the more I did not like him. He would just post random weird stuff, and he seemed kind of creepy. Like he would take these selfies with wide eyes and stuff, and he would post like 10 times a day. A few days went by without any contact from him. I had pretty much forgot all about the guy until he messaged me on Facebook. I did not want to talk to him, so I didn't respond and I deleted him, but I forgot to block his number. The next morning, I woke up to a slew of threatening texts. He asked me why I deleted him and even threatened to come to my job, mentioning it by name. I texted back telling him to leave me alone, and then I blocked him. I thought that would do the trick. A few days went by with nothing. Everything seemed fine, and I forgot all about the guy. But then, one day, I was at work again like normal. The way my office is I have sort of a cubicle in a much larger room. It's not quite a full cubicle though, so I can see around the entire office really. I sit at a table with my computer, and there are people kind of all over in the large room. When I was working, I heard some people start talking over near the entrance from the hallway. I looked over, and I saw that guy. I couldn't believe it. He had come to my job. He didn't see me right away, as I was kind of in the back corner of the room, not out of sight, but not that obvious either. I instantly ducked down and hid underneath my desk. My coworker saw me and asked what was going on. Meanwhile, the guy was talking to, I think it was Donald, who's one of the guys that works closer to the door. He was asking who the guy was and what he was doing here. The guy was saying that he was there to see someone, but when questioned, he didn't say who. He tried to walk farther in, and Donald was standing right next to him trying to stop him. I motioned for my coworker to get down for some reason too, so then she hid underneath her desk. I whispered to her the gist of the situation. The guy basically started walking around the office, I guess looking for me, but Donald was eventually able to kind of get him out of the room. He then closed the door and locked it. The guy started knocking on the door and then apparently asked for me, but Donald had had it at that point and yelled at him that he was calling the cops. This finally got the man to leave. I then came out and explained to my coworkers the situation. Everyone was pretty confused, and we all agreed that it was crazy. Thankfully, after that, the man did not return, or else we would have called the cops. I still can't believe that the guy actually showed up at my job. I'm not really sure how he found out where I worked and stuff, or how he even got my number. I really have no idea who he was, but I hope that I never see him or hear from him again. I was hanging out in my living room just watching TV in my apartment one night. It was a relaxing evening until my phone rang. When I looked, I saw that it was a number I didn't recognize, so I didn't answer. A short time later, I got a notification that I had a new voicemail. I thought that it was odd how somebody that I didn't know had just called me and left a voicemail. I figured it was some kind of a scam, but I decided to play the message. So I went on my phone and listened to it. A person with a kind of weird voice said, "Marcus, congratulations, call me back." My name is not Marcus. I figured that this person had the wrong number. I had no idea why somebody would be congratulating me or calling me Marcus. I texted the number saying, "I am not Marcus. I think you have the wrong number." Literally right after this, they called me back. I did not like the fact that they had called me instead of texting me, but I decided to answer to try to clear the air. As soon as I said hello, the man with the weird voice said, "Hi, Marcus." The way that the guy spoke was just strange. It was not just the way his voice sounded, but also his tone and overall everything. I stopped him and said, "I'm not Marcus. You have the wrong number." The person insisted that I was. He said, "Marcus, congratulations." I was so confused that I was speechless. I literally said nothing. The guy then said, "Congratulations, Marcus," and then he hung up. At that point, I thought that it had to be now a prank. Somebody was pulling a joke on me. Why this was a joke, I had no idea. Who's Marcus? I don't know. I also didn't know who would be doing this because I didn't recognize the voice at all. I also have all my friends' numbers saved. It just didn't sound like a voice changer though, or one of those AI voices. There just seemed to be too much emotion in it. It sounded human. A short time later, they called again, which I let go to voicemail. The person left a voicemail once more, and when I listened to it, I only got more confused. The person calling said, "I'm calling you to say that you are Marcus, and I don't know why you keep denying it. Call me back when you have a chance, and congratulations." This was so weird. I didn't know what was going on. I did not call the person back. I didn't respond by text either. I really didn't know what to do. A few days went by, and I had no more calls or texts from this person. Then I came home to my apartment one evening to find an envelope at my front door. I picked it up, went inside, and then opened it. There was a letter that said at the start of it, "Congratulations, Marcus." The letter went on to say a whole bunch of nothing. It was typed out with a basic font. There was a lot of big words that sounded really complicated, but in my mind it pretty much added up to a whole lot of nothing. In the end though, I noticed that it said I had to pay them $10,000. I had no idea why. I ripped up the letter and threw it away. Since then, I have not received any more letters or calls or anything. But the fact that this person went to my apartment and knows where I live really creeps me out. I'm hoping that it was just a prank put on by a friend. But I just don't know who would do that or why. It just seems so random. This happened many years ago in the 1990s. I was in high school at the time and lived with my parents and older sister at home. I was constantly using my phone to talk to my friends on almost a daily basis. This was before social media obviously, and was before texting was really that popular. Every time I would call my friends, I would dial the entire number. There was speed dial and stuff like that, but I just didn't really use it. I had all my friends' numbers memorized and I could dial really fast. So on this particular night, I was at home by myself. My parents were gone somewhere, I don't remember where, and so was my sister. I was going to call my friend Jacqueline and ask if she wanted to come over and hang out because I was bored. We would hang out at each other's places all the time. I think it must have been a Friday night, because normally I wouldn't have called people to hang out that late. And also, I don't think my parents and sister would have been out late on a weeknight. Anyways, after I dialed Jacqueline's number, I remember that she picked up. As soon as she did, I just started talking. We were such good friends and called each other so much that we really didn't say, "Hello, who's there?" We had caller ID as well, so we would know when each other was calling. As soon as I heard her pick up, I just said, "Hey, I'm bored, my parents and sister are gone, so I'm just home by myself. What are you doing? Do you want to come over?" After I said this, there was just silence on the other end. I said, "Hello?" Then the phone call ended as the other line hung up. I was confused. Why would my best friend Jacqueline hang up on me? And why wouldn't she say anything? So I dialed her again to call her back. I was thinking that it had to be a mistake and we just randomly got disconnected or something. This time when I called her, she picked up again. Except this time she said, "What's up?" I asked her if she had just hung up on me. She said no. I told her how I had just called her, and she said that she did not get any calls from me until just now. I was confused for a moment, until I realized that I must have dialed the wrong number before. Perhaps I got one of the digits wrong and someone else had picked up. This was kind of awkward because I had actually talked to them. Why would they not say anything though? Either way, it was not too big of a deal, but just slightly embarrassing. So I went on to ask Jacqueline if she wanted to come over, but she said she could not because she was about to watch a movie with her parents. So we talked for maybe a minute longer and then hung up. After that, I just decided to go to the living room and see what was on TV or something like that. So, around 30 minutes later probably, as I was there on the couch in the living room, I heard a knock on the front door. This was really strange because it was nighttime. All the windows were covered, so I had no idea who would be there. I was instantly creeped out. After a pause of maybe 30 seconds, they knocked again. This time I went over to a front window and very carefully looked out of it. It was dark outside, but I could tell that a man was standing there. However, I could not see any details about him. He then tried to open the door, which thankfully was locked. I was now freaking out. Some random guy was trying to break in, it seemed. He then turned and walked away. I only saw his backside as he made his way to the street. I just remember that he was wearing a jacket, so I couldn't really tell what he looked like at all. The whole thing really freaked me out, but I was glad that he was now gone. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I wondered if he was the person that I accidentally called. I mean, I had mentioned that I was home alone, and I had also dialed a number in the same area code, so he would be local. But how he got my exact address, I'm not sure. It could also just be a crazy coincidence, but I don't think it was. After that, he never came back. But I often remember that and wonder if it was the same guy, and if so, how he knew where I lived exactly. I'm just glad that he never returned.
This story takes place back when I was in college. I attended a large university that was a couple of hours from where I'm from. I had lived in the dorms with my roommate Rachel the previous year. The two of us decided to rent a small college house together for that upcoming school year. We were able to find a place that was cheap that we could afford, but it didn't come with any furniture, so we had to get some. Mostly we would look on Craigslist for either free or really cheap furniture. After getting the lease for the house in June, we got a couple of things over the summer. At one point, close to the start of the school year, I still needed a desk and was looking around Craigslist. I found one that I really liked, and it was also really cheap. So I reached out to the seller via text and let them know that I was interested. The seller responded, asking me several questions which I found odd. He asked for my name, age, and why I wanted to buy the desk, and he made it clear that his price was not negotiable. I figured that he was just super organized or something, and I had no interest in negotiating either. I mean, the desk was like $20, so it was already a good deal. I texted him the information, and he texted back saying that his name was John Smith, which also seemed odd. I mean, that kind of seems like a fake name to me. Anyways, he said that I could come by and buy the desk the following evening between 7 and 9 o'clock. He also said that he would help me bring the desk to my car. It was a pretty large desk, and I had cleared out the back of my SUV for furniture I got. I told John Smith that I would just bring my roommate and it would be fine. He said no, not to bring her, and that it was no problem for him to help. This seemed strange to me as well, which only made me want to bring Rachel with even more. So I told her about it, and she agreed that it seemed sketchy. I should have just forgot the whole thing and not got the desk, but it was a really nice desk and I wanted to get it. I was young and dumb, and I felt that nothing would go wrong. So the following evening, we drove to the address that was provided. We got there shortly after 7 o'clock, and it was a fairly average-looking neighborhood. It was maybe 10 minutes from campus and was pretty quiet, with many houses that had fairly large yards. I texted the owner, John Smith, that I was there. He told me to go inside the house and that the couch was inside. Rachel stayed in the car, and I told her that if I needed her help, I would let her know. I walked up to the front door and knocked. John Smith opened it and told me to come in. He appeared to be in his 60s, had a mustache and a sloppy-looking beard, and smelled like cigarettes and beer. I walked inside the house and was inside of the living room. I did not see the desk there, and John Smith informed me that it was in the basement. This made me want to leave immediately. If he knew he was selling it, why would he not at least bring it upstairs? I was annoyed but said okay. He claimed that he was sorry and that he just forgot to bring it upstairs. He said that he also needed help bringing it up the stairs. So against my better judgment, I followed him over to the basement door. He opened it and it revealed a staircase going down to an unfinished basement. It was really dark down there with not much light at all. This only made me more nervous. The man started walking down the stairs and I followed him. Down in the unfinished basement, there were some boxes and junk scattered around, but overall not too many things. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we then walked a little ways into the basement. I looked around, and finally I spotted the desk that I was buying. It was completely backed against a corner of the basement far away. This was odd because the listing for the desk showed it being in a room with natural light. I remembered that, so it had to have been upstairs. The man then started walking away. Not towards the desk though, but towards the stairs. He then started to walk up them. I was confused and also really nervous. As the man was making it to the top of the stairs, I didn't know what was going on. And just then, I heard a sudden knocking from the front door of the house. It had to be Rachel. The man stopped on the stairs and looked back at me, and in an angry tone asked, "Who's that?" I was speechless in the moment, and without me even answering, the man quickly turned back and walked up the rest of the stairs and left the basement. I followed and quickly went up the stairs and made my way to the main floor. When we both got back upstairs, the man walked over to the front door. I was trying to quickly go over there as well. Sure enough, Rachel was standing there at the door. She was still knocking on it, and knocking rather loudly. The man opened up the door and angrily asked her who she was and what she wanted. Without letting her respond, he told her to leave. Rachel said she was my roommate, and I walked over and went past the guy. He angrily yelled at me and said that I was supposed to come alone. I didn't want to argue with the guy or anything. I just quickly walked past him, and Rachel and I then ran through the guy's yard and back to the car. He was yelling and cursing at us the whole time. Then we left and drove back home. By the time we returned, the Craigslist listing was deleted. I still made a report to Craigslist about him though. I'm guessing that John Smith was not his real name, but I do have his address. I never heard anything more, so I don't know if anything was done about him. I guess technically he didn't commit any crime, but it was sure as sketchy as can be. The fact that he wanted me to come alone was a major red flag. I should have never gone there, and I'm glad that Rachel came to the door when she did. She told me that she just had a bad feeling about it, and it seemed to be taking a long time, so she decided to just knock on the door and see how it was going. But when nobody answered the door for a while, she started loudly knocking. Thankfully, it worked. My name is Abby, and several years ago, I matched with this guy on a dating app. I had been on a few dates with guys from apps here and there. Some were alright and some were not, but nothing really crazy had ever happened. So I matched with this one guy whose name was Sebastian. In his pictures, he appeared tall, had dark hair, and after matching, he reached out to me. We started talking, and within a few days, he suggested that we go on a date. I was feeling good about things, so I agreed. However, I did not feel like I really knew Sebastian that well at all yet, but I figured that it would be a good chance to get to know him a lot better. Sebastian suggested a pretty fancy restaurant, and I was somewhat surprised. I didn't know if he was really rich or trying to impress me or something. I remember mentioning how the place was really fancy, and he said that was good. Before the date, he offered to pick me up, and I said no thanks. I figured he was just trying to be nice. So I drove to the restaurant and met him there. We sat down in the very nice restaurant and started talking. Sebastian overall seemed nice for the most part. However, some things just seemed a little bit strange about him. He looked just like his pictures, so he was no catfish, but it was more of his personality that for some reason seemed a little off. I didn't know exactly what it was at first. I remember though a couple of times he asked me where I lived. The first time I told him in the city, and then I asked him where he lived, and that was just normal conversation. He asked me where in that city, and I told him a little more specific area, but still pretty basic. And then he asked me what street I lived on, which I found kind of odd, and I'm not sure why, but I told him. I lived in an apartment building at the time, so that wasn't giving away exactly where I lived. The conversation changed after that when we talked about different stuff. A while later though, he asked me if I lived in an apartment. I don't remember how exactly the conversation shifted to that. I said yes, and told him the name of the complex that I lived in. However, he then asked me what my apartment number was. By now, I found this very odd. I asked him why he wanted to know that, and I jokingly asked him if he was going to send me flowers or try to break into my place. He laughed about it, and then I kind of changed the subject without giving up my room number. There were a few other things he said in conversation that were a little odd, and I can't remember specifics now, but I just remember that the longer we talked, the more I had a strange feeling about him. I tried to look past it though and just enjoy the date at the nice restaurant. We were there for well over an hour. When we were finally going to leave, Sebastian offered to give me a ride home.
I told him that I drove there myself, so I didn't need one. He said that he would walk me out to my car instead. I said that was okay, so we walked out to the parking lot, hugged, and then went our separate ways. I got into my car and drove back home to my apartment. After getting back, I didn't really know what to make of Sebastian, but overall, I did not want to go on another date with him. I went to bed that night, only to wake up a short time later to the sound of somebody knocking on my apartment door. I didn't know who it could be. The knocking was sort of constant, but not that loud. I got up and walked out of my bedroom and over to the front door. The knocking had sort of stopped by then. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. Whoever it was appeared to have left. I almost opened the door and looked in the hallway, but decided not to. So I started to walk back to my bedroom to go back to sleep, as I was not even 100% awake yet. But on my way back to my bedroom, I heard another knock. This was very strange, and I walked back over to the door and looked through the peephole again, only to see nobody there once more. I was really confused at this point and didn't know what to make of this. So I just kept looking through the peephole. I'm not sure why, but I kept looking for like over a minute straight. Then, as I was still looking, I saw a man suddenly come into view, and surprisingly, it appeared to be Sebastian. He quickly knocked on my door again, and then even faster went to the side of the door going out of my sight. I was extremely creeped out by him now. I wasn't sure what to do, but I certainly was not answering the door. Somehow, Sebastian knew where I lived. I stood there by my door for a minute or so. I just wanted him to go away. Then he knocked again. That's when I figured I should do something. I yelled loudly, "I called the police, Sebastian." Not long after this, I thought I heard footsteps walking away. I didn't hear any more knocking for at least 5 minutes, and at that point I decided to look in the hallway. I very carefully opened my door just a crack. The hallway appeared empty. I looked around and he was nowhere in sight. It seemed as though I finally got him to leave. Then I reported Sebastian to the dating app and then blocked him everywhere. And since then, I have not seen or heard from him. I don't live in that apartment anymore either. I still don't know exactly how he knew which apartment was mine. Obviously, I had told him where I lived as far as the apartment building, but I never gave him my room number. I also didn't notice being followed home by him or anything. The only thing I can think of is maybe somehow he did follow me home, but he must have been very sneaky. Or else he got to my apartment and asked somebody if they knew where I lived maybe. Either way, that was by far my craziest experience with a dating app. This happened back when I was in high school. It had to be either my freshman or sophomore year, because those were the only 2 years that I rode the bus. School started at 7:45 a.m., but the bus would come by my stop to pick me up at 6:30. Well, it was supposed to be 6:30, but the bus would often show up at more like 6:50 or even 7. To get to the bus stop, I would walk down my street to the end of it. Then the bus would stop there and I would get on. I was the only kid at that particular stop who rode the bus, and there weren't any other stops in the immediate area. It was a pretty quiet area because in my neighborhood, the yards were a little bigger and the houses farther apart. There was less traffic on the roads as well, especially at those hours. Across the street from the bus stop were some woods and houses spread out pretty far. So one morning, I walked down my street to the end where the bus stop was. I got there at about 6:30, but figured I would probably be waiting for a good 10 or 20 minutes like normal. I'm not sure why the bus was always so late, because my stop was only the third one of the morning. Every now and then the bus would show up perfectly on time though, so you could never depend on it to be late. So I stood out there in the dark because the sun hadn't come up yet. It was very quiet and there were no other cars on the roads at all. I waited and waited. I was pretty tired from having to get up so early like I often was in high school. Then I noticed headlights in the distance. I figured that it had to be my bus. When it came closer, I noticed that it was in fact a bus, but not mine. It looked different. It slowed down when it got closer to me. Then I noticed that this was not the typical bus. My bus was the normal standard yellow school bus, but this one was like a really light yellow, almost white. It was slightly shorter than usual and looked older and more beat up. Now, in the past, one time we had a different bus for whatever reason, and I had a substitute bus driver once as well, so I thought that maybe that was the case. But when that happened, the bus had actually looked newer and in better shape. Something about this just gave me a bad feeling. The bus slowed down even more, and then came to a stop right across the street from me for me to get on. I did not cross the street.
I started to get a bad feeling like I should not get on the bus. I looked and could see the driver. It was not the usual bus driver that we had. This guy had a dark gray and also part black beard. He was wearing a hat as well and looked over at me. I just kept standing there. Then he waved at me to get on the bus. I almost went. I think I might have even took a step, but I thought better of it. I stayed where I was and then waved for the bus to go forward without me. It did not. The bus driver had the door open and he shouted for me to get on. I looked in the windows and could see that there appeared to not be any other kids on the bus at all. Normally there would be 3 other kids on the bus at that point, as I was the 3rd stop and one of the stops before me had 2 kids in it, so this was just really weird. I said no and then turned around and started to walk away. I was going back towards my house, and then something unexpected happened. As I was walking back down my street, I heard the bus turn onto my street behind me. I looked back and it was indeed going onto my street, something that had never happened before. At that point, I started to run. That's when the bus stopped. I then heard the beeping as it backed up and then turned around and went back onto the busier road in the direction that it had come from. I was so confused. I stopped and then went back to the bus stop, feeling really creeped out now. That bus was nowhere in sight anymore as it had drove away. I stood there in silence, wondering what had just happened. I was glad that I didn't get on that bus though. I figured that if it was somehow the bus I was supposed to be on, I could tell my mom that I missed it and she would drive me to school. That's something that happened a few times before, and even though it took my mom out of the way to get to her job, she could still do it. I stood there at the bus stop and the time approached 6:50. Then I saw more headlights. Another bus drove down the street. I thought at first that it was the same bus coming back, but it wasn't. This was actually my correct bus, the same one as usual. I saw a few students on already, and the bus stopped for me. I crossed the street and got on. It was the normal bus driver and students. I don't think I was ever so happy to see them before. I got on the bus, went to my seat, and then rode the bus to school, wondering what would have happened had I got on that other bus. I never saw that other bus again. To this day, I wonder who it was driving it and why he drove to my stop. Was it something innocent, like a substitute bus driver who just got lost or got his route mixed up or something? Or was it something terrible, like a kidnapper trying to pose as a bus driver? I'm not sure, but I'm so glad that I listened to my instincts and didn't get on that bus.
For a little background, when I was a young woman about 10 years ago, I worked at a Walmart for a few months. I worked as a cashier and was just 20 years old, working during the summer when I was back home from college. The Walmart was not far from where I lived, and they were always hiring with it being a large store and whatnot. So after getting the job, things went well for a while. Then, one time, this man came to my checkout. He looked young, but probably a few years older than me. Overall, I would not say that he was ugly, but I will say that he was not very attractive. When he was at my checkout, I was scanning his items that he was buying, and he told me that I was beautiful. I was happy to get a compliment and told him thanks. He then asked me what my Instagram was. I don't know why, but for some reason, I gave it to him. Looking back, I could have just said that I didn't have one or that I didn't want to give it out. But I told him it, and he took out his phone right then and there, which I didn't expect. He typed it in, found my profile, and then followed me and showed me that he did. It seemed a little bit strange, but I just played it off and said thanks. He then asked me if I had a boyfriend. I told him no, but I'm not really looking for anything at all right now. He said that he understood, and I felt a little better. There was an awkward silence, and I quickly finished scanning his items. I saw him looking at his phone, and I realized that he was on my Instagram page still. Quickly enough, though, he paid, and I told him to have a nice day. When he left, he said bye, and I thought that I would not see him again. But I was wrong. Literally the next day, the guy sent me a message on Instagram. He said hi, and I did respond to him saying hi back. He started a conversation with me, and I didn't know what to think about it. Pretty quickly, though, he asked to hang out, and I said no. He continued to message me, so I just ignored him. To that point, he had not done anything that creepy yet. I'm not going to make a guy seem like a creep just for shooting his shot with me. But after that is when things got real bad. He started messaging me almost non-stop. When I stopped replying, he just continued sending me messages. I was so tired of seeing the notifications. In 2 days, he sent me over 30 messages. Most of them were just saying stuff like, hey, or why aren't you responding? Finally, I sent him one final message, saying that I was sorry but I didn't want to hang out or talk with him anymore and to please leave me alone. He did not, though. He just kept sending me even more messages. so at that point I blocked him. But this didn't stop the young man. He made another fake Instagram account and started messaging me there. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was the same guy, so I blocked that account as well. He didn't message me after that. But a few days later, I got word from some of my friends that he was messaging them on Instagram. Apparently, he saw who some of my friends were through my Instagram page, so he followed a few of them and then started asking them questions about me. He claimed that he was a good friend of mine, and so a few of them contacted me about it because he seemed strange. I was angry and told my friends to block him and that he wouldn't leave me alone. After this, I thought the whole ordeal was finally over. Except, one night during the next week, I was working another shift at Walmart. As I was at my checkout, I was kept pretty busy for most of the time. But at one point when things quieted down, I looked around and observed the same man there. He was sitting down on a bench closer to the exit doors. He was just sitting there and watching me. When I noticed him, he didn't wave or anything. He just stared intently. It was really creepy, and I looked away at once. I tried to distract myself, and soon enough, some more customers came into my check lane. But when I looked back and he was still there, I had enough. I left my check lane and found my boss, who I told about the whole situation. He said that he would go talk to the guy. Now, I don't know what my boss was planning to say or do. I'm not sure if he had the authority to kick the guy out of the store or anything. I guess he did if he was a manager, but as soon as my boss walked over and approached the man, the guy quickly got up and left. They didn't even have a conversation. I was glad to see him gone and hoped that he would not come back. I worked the rest of my shift and it went well. I got off sometime that night at maybe 9 or 10 o'clock. However, after clocking out, I left the store and started walking through the parking lot to my car. It was very quiet now. I saw one guy kind of walking around the lot. I realized it was the same guy. He was not standing by my car, but I hoped that he wouldn't notice me. I turned and started walking to another row of cars closer to mine. But then he did notice me. I saw him start walking in my direction. I bolted for my car and ran there. I was able to make it, but the guy reached the car right after I did. I went inside and locked the doors, and he started knocking on my window. I didn't waste any time and just drove away. After that, I actually called my boss and told him about the guy to make him aware of the situation, because if this were to continue, I would not feel safe coming to work anymore. Thankfully, I was off for a few days. When I returned to work, I was told that the guy was banned from the Walmart. Apparently, he showed up again, I guess to look for me, but he didn't buy anything and just walked around. Based on him following me to my car, the manager trespassed him from the store. I think that was enough for him to finally leave me alone once and for all, because I never saw him again after that. I only worked at the Walmart for about another month though. Looking back, it was a pretty creepy experience. I used to work at a Blockbuster video store back in the day. I think that I worked there for about a year and a half, and I was able to work my way up to manager. One night, I was by myself towards the end of the shift. It was a quiet night, and I was closing. At my store, it closed at 9 p.m., and for the last hour or so, we didn't really get any customers. So as far as I was aware, the store was completely empty besides me. When 9 p.m. was approaching, I went around to make sure nobody was there and straighten up a few things. However, when I got towards the back end of the store, I heard a noise. It was the sound of somebody walking, and I realized that I wasn't alone. It was strange because I hadn't heard or seen anyone in the longest time. Whoever was in here must have almost had to be hiding or something. I called out asking who was there, but I got no response. I said that we were closing soon, but there was still nothing. The footsteps were not that far away, and whoever was in here was just a few aisles out of my sight. I walked closer. I looked around but still couldn't see anything. I could hear them walking away like they were trying to move away from me. After walking faster and going around a corner, I finally saw for a split second a woman go around another corner away from me. She was wearing a winter coat and hat and had dark hair. I called out to her asking what she was doing, but she still didn't answer me. The woman had a slightly disheveled appearance. I stopped hearing her move around, so I kept walking up and down each aisle. Eventually, I spotted her. She was hiding behind a DVD display. When I saw her, she got up and ran to another aisle. I was so confused and wondered if something was wrong with the woman or if she was crazy. I asked her if she was all right, but she still didn't answer. It was very weird. She didn't seem to enjoy running around, like she wasn't smiling or laughing as if it was a game. It was like she was very seriously trying to run away from me. I told her again loudly that we were closing and she would have to leave.
Of course, she still didn't answer me. As confused as I was, I went back over to the counter where I worked to finish up some things. I didn't know what I was going to do about the woman hiding in the store, but it was like 8:58 at that point. Then, when I was facing the other direction, I heard the doors to the store open. I looked over and just barely saw the woman walking out. I was glad that she was gone. Very quickly, I walked over to the doors and locked them. Then I was able to do a few tasks before leaving. I left the store at probably 9:05 or so. The parking lot was very quiet, and I walked out to my car, which was the only one there. Right when I got inside, I heard footsteps approaching me. I looked and saw the same woman walking in my direction, but she looked a little different now. Her hair had looked sort of messy before, and her hat had been crooked. Now she looked very neat. Her hair was perfectly in place, and her hat was neatly on her head. She also had a more friendly look on her face. I rolled my window down, and the woman said hi to me. She then very politely asked me for a ride. I was so confused, and she mentioned nothing about why she had been running around the store hiding from me. It almost seemed like a different woman, but no, this was definitely the same person. Remembering her past behavior, I told her no, I could not give her a ride. The woman asked if I was sure, still being polite, and I said yes. Then she said okay, and I put my window back up. She started to walk away towards the back of my car. When she did though, she suddenly reached for my door handle really fast and tried opening the back door to the car. It was thankfully locked. After finding out she was locked, she loudly banged on it twice and appeared to kick at my door. I then hit the gas and drove away. I left the woman standing in the parking lot looking at me as I drove off. I have no idea why she did the things that she did. My best guess is drugs. She acted so different and normal when she was talking to me though. I luckily never saw her again in my time working at Blockbuster.
One night, I was home alone watching a movie on TV. I had been flipping through the channels until I found something interesting, like I often do. I live by myself in an apartment, and it's a pretty average place for the most part. As it got to be late at night, I was starting to get tired. Out of nowhere, randomly, there was a knock on my apartment front door. At first, I thought that it was one of my neighbors complaining about the noise. The volume of the movie on my TV was pretty loud, to be honest. So I quickly turned it down and then got up from the couch and walked over to the front door. Before opening the door, I looked through the peephole. I saw a young woman standing there. She looked to be in her 20s, had dark hair and a few tattoos on her arms. I didn't recognize her, but then again, I didn't know most of my neighbors. Thinking she was still a neighbor, I opened the door. Before she said anything, I said, "Sorry, I didn't realize I had the volume so loud." In my mind, I was 100% sure that she was complaining about the noise because I had no idea what on earth else a neighbor would be at my door for. She looked confused for a moment and then said, "No, that's fine." Then she told me that she was in an awkward situation. She said her boyfriend had accidentally backed into my car in the parking lot. Her boyfriend was apparently over at the car and didn't want to leave the scene, so she came in to tell me. I parked my car in the same spot every day in the parking lot, and it was out there and our lot was sort of small. Things would get crowded with cars, so I was sort of annoyed by this, but was also glad that the woman was telling me about it and they didn't just drive away. I told her 1 second I would go and get my phone, and she said okay. I needed my phone for insurance stuff and to take pictures of the damage. I quickly went back into my apartment, and my phone was still on the couch in the living room. When I got it, I was now at the back end of my apartment and near my balcony. There was a large window, and from there you could see most of the parking lot and sort of the area where I parked. I was curious, so I went over and looked out of the window. I saw the parking lot, and it seemed completely quiet. When I looked to where my car was, I could just barely see it, but I could in fact see it, and it appeared to be just fine. There was nobody standing around it and no car right next to it or anything. I couldn't see any damage. Suddenly, this whole thing seemed really sketchy. I went back to the door and opened it again. The woman was still there. I asked her how much damage there was to the car. She said it was pretty bad and we better go to the car now. There definitely was not a lot of damage on my car. I told her that she must be mistaken. She mentioned my full name and asked if that was me. I said yes, and then she confirmed that yes, it was my car that had been hit. I was confused. I explained to her that I just saw my car out the window and it didn't look like there was any damage on it at all. She looked at me but did not say anything. Then the woman just turned and walked away without saying a word. She was quickly gone. I went back inside my apartment. Then I looked out the window again towards the parking lot. Things were really quiet there for a minute or two, but I continued watching. I saw the same woman as well as a man come into my view. Both of them walked into a random car which was not even close to mine, and then quickly drove away. I was really creeped out by the whole thing. I had never seen that woman before in my life prior to that night. I couldn't help but feel that she was trying to set me up. She was with a guy, and maybe they were going to try to rob me or something. I'm really glad that I didn't follow her. But how did she know which car was mine? Or how did she know my name? That part is something that I still don't know. This happened a few months ago. I was hanging out at my girlfriend's apartment one night, and I ended up staying kind of late. This happened all the time, but it wasn't a big deal because I only lived a few miles away. It was just under a 10-minute drive to get back to my place. By now, as you could imagine, the roads were very quiet. So that's how I noticed that I might be getting followed not long into the drive. I didn't know for sure, but I just remembered that a car was behind me, and when I turned at one road, it did the same thing. I don't remember exactly when it started to follow me, and after the first turn, I thought nothing of it. The way back to my apartment, though, was not a straight shot, and I had to turn a few times. For the next 3 turns, the car did the same as me. I just found this odd, and we were basically the only 2 cars on the entire road. The closer we got, the more I wondered if I was being followed. Of course, with it being late at night, I was probably just feeling slightly paranoid. I didn't actually seriously believe that I was being followed, but I was curious. Then I came to a stoplight. There was a red upcoming at an intersection. To that point, I had not been able to see who was behind the wheel of the car behind me because it was too dark. When I got to the intersection, there was a bit more light there. I looked back in my mirror and I saw who was driving. The guy looked like a clown. His face was painted and his hair appeared dyed red. He also had a red nose on. It wasn't a funny clown though, it just looked creepy. This was a bit unsettling because it was nowhere near Halloween time or anything. I didn't know why some guy would be out driving late at night looking like a clown. When the light turned green, I kept going with the clown still following me. We made another turn and I was a little bit more nervous. Soon we were approaching my apartment complex. It is several buildings with a large parking lot sort of in the middle. As I pulled into the lot, the clown did too. That's when I realized that I could not just park and try to go inside, so I kept going through the parking lot and then turned out at the next area. When I did this, the clown did not turn out of the parking lot, but kept going farther into it. I let out a sigh of relief. I got back onto the road, and I guessed that it was just a big coincidence, and for some reason somebody who lived at my apartment complex was dressed as a clown. They also happened to drive home right behind me the entire way. It was weird, but I figured I'd drive down a ways, come back, and then go inside. So I went to the end of that quiet street, then made a U-turn and headed back to the apartment complex. I made it back about 2 or 3 minutes after the clown would have arrived. I parked my car on the opposite end of the lot to where I had seen the clown going. He was nowhere in sight now, but there were a lot of cars there. After getting out of my car, I began walking for my apartment building. But that's when I saw the guy again. The clown was now walking on a sidewalk near the front of one of the buildings. When I saw him, I started to walk faster to get to my building. But when the clown saw me, it was like he was after me right away. He changed directions and was now headed for where I was. We were still a long distance away from each other though. I hightailed it for the side door of my apartment building. As soon as I started moving, I saw the clown start to run after me. This caused me to run as well. I went as fast as I could, and thankfully I was able to reach the door. I quickly went inside and made sure that the door shut behind me. Then I ran up the stairs to my floor. I didn't hear the door opening behind me, so I'm assuming that the clown did not get in. Then I went to my apartment and was finally home. I didn't get any knocks on my door or have anything strange happen. And since then, I haven't seen that crazy clown. I wonder who it was though, and why the guy followed me. Did he know who I was, or was I just a random target? Obviously, I wouldn't probably recognize the guy if I saw him, unless of course he was dressed as a clown again. I'm hoping that nothing like that happens again. Last year, I went shopping at a really large mall. It was a weekend, so it was very crowded and tons of other people were there. In some areas, it was hard to even walk through the walkways because it was so crowded. I was there for a few hours and did a decent amount of shopping. However, in the time that I was there, I was pickpocketed. At least, I'm like 90% sure that I was. I would always keep my wallet just inside of my back pocket, which was a terrible habit.
Habits are hard to break though, but I obviously don't do that anymore. So anyways, I just know that when I left the mall, I realized that I did not have my wallet anymore, and despite me keeping it in a bad spot, it had never fallen out before when I sat down or anything. After realizing that I didn't have it, I quickly canceled my credit cards. Then I looked everywhere that I could think to look. There was really no use though. Surely somebody would have picked it up. And even if nobody did, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. I was disappointed, but luckily I didn't have much cash in the wallet and nobody had used my cards yet. I thought that I would never get it back, and so when I was home, I started ordering new credit cards. I also looked into getting a new driver's license. I was pretty disappointed, but what could I do about it now? However, late that night, I got a text from a random number I did not recognize. The text said, "Meet me tomorrow night at 11 p.m. and bring $100 cash to get wallet back." It also had an address which turned out to be a park near the city a ways away. I texted back asking who this was and where they had got my wallet. They didn't respond though. I wasn't sure what I should do. Had they stolen my wallet or found it? I was pretty sure that they had stolen it. I considered getting the police involved, but I figured that I couldn't prove that this person stole it and not just found it. The fact that they wanted me to bring $100 really made me mad though. After thinking about it, I decided that I would go and meet with them at the park. But I told my friend Marty about it, and he agreed to go with me to get my wallet at the park. I didn't know what to expect, but being asked to meet at 11 o'clock at night in a park sure seemed sketchy. I really wanted to get my wallet back though. So the next night we drove to the park and got there at around 11. I had never been to that park before. It was a parking lot off a quiet road surrounded by woods. Then there were a few trails, but it was super dark out now. When I arrived, nobody else was in the parking lot. Marty and I sat in the car waiting. At 11 p.m. sharp, I got another text from the number. It said, "Exit your vehicle and take the left path for a quarter mile." This seemed even more sketchy to me. For some reason though, I got out of the car. I just really wanted my wallet back. I had the $100 cash and Marty stayed in the car. So I began walking down the path to the left. It was literally pitch dark and I could barely see anything. I made it about 100 yards down the trail when I felt my phone vibrating. It was not another text from the number though, but it was a call from Marty. I picked it up. I heard Marty telling me to get back to the car now. Then I heard off in the distance tons of honking coming from a car horn. I also heard a car driving. I turned around and ran back to the parking lot. By the time I got there, I just barely saw an SUV driving off down the quiet road. I saw Marty in the car waving me over, still parked in the same spot. I quickly went back inside the car. Marty explained to me what had happened. He said that when I was a ways down the path, this SUV pulled into the parking lot. He saw at least 3 guys in it, and he claimed that he was sure he saw one of them brandishing a gun. They pulled up and parked a few spaces away. Marty figured that I was in trouble to get jumped, or maybe worse, so he started honking the car horn like crazy. This actually scared them off. I figured they thought Marty was me, and seeing how he was still in the car and making a bunch of noise, they wouldn't be able to rob him. If Marty had not been there, these guys would have ambushed me alone on the dark trail. Now, I know a lot of people will say that I'm stupid. Why would anybody meet a random person alone in a park at 11 p.m. on a random trail in the woods? And you're right, it was stupid, and I deserve all the crap that I get for it. But I was much younger, and I've certainly learned from the experience. At least I had the thought to bring a friend, which ended up saving me. Hopefully this can teach anybody listening to always be prepared in any situation. For almost a year, I worked at a Subway restaurant in my local town. I was able to become a manager there, and the town that I lived in was pretty small, so I often worked by myself. I was able to open or close the store if I needed to, and we usually wouldn't be that busy. It's more of a rural area, so other than weekends or the early evening, it was never that busy. One night, I was working a closing shift by myself. For the last few hours, it was dead and we barely had any customers. When we closed, I did some cleaning and final tasks, locked up, and then left for the night. I got to my car, which I had parked kind of far away in the parking lot. You see, the parking lot to the Subway is connected with this other parking lot. That was for an office building, and it sort of went around a corner. As I sat in my car reading some texts before leaving, I could still see the Subway sort of. I noticed a man walk up to the doors and try to open them. I wasn't quite sure where this man had come from because no other cars were around. But after trying to open the doors, the man did not leave. He just kept standing there, and I could see that he was looking inside now. I decided to go let him know that we were closed. So I started my car and then I began driving towards the man through the parking lot. I remember that as I was doing this, he looked over at me and then started to walk away from the subway. I drove a little bit closer, stopped, and rolled down my window. I said that the subway was closed and told him the time that we closed at. He just said okay and then continued walking off. Then I drove away and went home. So the next night I was working the exact same shift. I was by myself closing again, and it was a pretty similar night to the previous one. We didn't get very many customers, and then I closed up and left like usual. This time though, after leaving, I was low on fuel, so I went over to the gas station that was nearby. The station was about a half-mile down the road, but in the opposite direction from where I had to go to get home. So I went back there and filled my tank. Then I was back on the quiet road going home again. There wasn't really anybody else out on the roads at this hour. This road happened to go right by my work of subway again. When I drove past, I looked over, probably because I worked there. However, when I did, I saw that there was a man standing next to one of the windows. This wasn't something that was that easy to see if you were just driving by, but I was able to notice him. It was a side window that he was at, and the man was standing in the grass, so it looked really strange. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. When I did, I had a little bit better view of the guy, and he looked just like the man from the night before. This was really strange. After stopping on the side of the road for less than 10 seconds, the man turned around and looked over at me. That's when I saw him turn back around and start jogging away from the subway. Pretty soon, he was out of my sight. After him running away like that, I realized that he was probably going to try to break in. I stayed where I was for a minute or so longer, and then I drove away. When I did though, I called the police non-emergency number and alerted them about it. It was very suspicious if nothing else. The next day the subway was fine and had not been broken into or anything, and for the next few times that I worked at night, I didn't encounter the man or anything strange at all. But like 2 weeks after this, I saw on the internet a news story that a subway across town had been broken into. I don't know, but I'm guessing that maybe it was the same guy. Maybe he just changed locations after I kept foiling his plans. Who knows, but I'm glad that he didn't break into the subway that I worked at. I was about 16 at the time, living at home deep in the mountains at my family's home. I frequently walked in the woods surrounding my home, but never really went that far out, either out of lack of curiosity or simply because I was lazy. One evening, I decided to take a flashlight and walk as far as I comfortably could into the valley behind my property. There are many deer, bears, and other animals near where I live, so I also brought some bear spray with me. I was about 25 minutes, maybe more, into my walk when I started to get an uneasy feeling like I was incredibly vulnerable or that I wasn't alone. I shrugged it off because I probably wasn't alone. I mean, there's a lot of wildlife in the forest, so it's not like I can just expect to be alone. I neared the creek that flowed around the property and I noticed some garbage. There were some pots and pans next to the water, as well as what looked like a tattered sleeping bag and some shoes. I didn't think much of it and I continued my walk, thinking about it every now and then and wondering if somebody was camping out near our house. It was almost completely dark by now, so I turned around and began to walk home. I kept glancing over my shoulder back towards the creek, worried that somebody might be behind me. About 5 or 6 minutes of walking in the pitch black, and I heard some branches snap a little ways behind me. My blood ran cold, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I turned around and spent a minute just shining my flashlight in every direction, wondering if a deer or even a bear was following me. Once I felt sure that nothing was there, I kept on walking. Not even a minute later, I heard running footsteps trampling behind me. I didn't even turn to look and see what it was or who was there. I just began running as fast as I could. I'm pretty sure I called out, pleading with whatever it was or whoever it was to stop. I desperately sprinted through the trees, trying to keep my flashlight pointed forward so I didn't trip or fall. I kept hearing footsteps stomping behind me and branches being snapped off the trees violently. I heard pained grunting and what sounded like someone violently growling. I began crying out of fear. I heard one loud growl or scream right behind me as whatever it was seemed to have fallen or slipped up, and I kept sprinting and never dared to look back. I eventually stopped hearing the running behind me. Once I made it to my property line, I saw the light of the house in the distance ahead of me, and I turned to see if I was still being followed. What I saw still torments me even now. A freakishly tall man standing about 100 yards away from me with my flashlight barely illuminating him. He was wearing what looked like a tattered hoodie and no pants.
I stood there for a moment, struck with fear, waiting to see if he would move. As I was about to turn away and run the last stretch to my house, he started sprinting viciously towards me. By vicious, I mean he was almost on all fours, using the trees to propel himself further, grabbing at the ground, lunging towards me. I let out a scream and ducked under my fence and sprinted as fast as I could back to my house. By the time I got there, I was completely out of breath, my throat hurt, and my knees were sore. I shined the light back towards the woods and saw the man at my fence waving at me, his tall, slender figure towering above the fence. I quickly made my way inside and locked all the doors. I woke my dad up and told him what happened. I don't remember exactly what he did about it, if he called the cops or just let it be, but I don't think anyone else ever saw the guy again. I still never go out into the woods alone or any time near dark, and I certainly stay away from the creek. I don't know if he's still out there. Hopefully he packed up the camp, which I assumed was his, and moved on. I was driving late at night with a friend on a little road in the middle of nowhere in the country. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning. We were surrounded by woods and fields and the typical landscape when you're in the country. After a tight corner in the middle of a forest, we saw a lady on the side of the road a few feet in front of us. Immediately my friend, who was the driver, slowed down the car to see if she needed help. Personally, as we were approaching this person, I started to feel uncomfortable. I told my friend, and he said, "Nah, don't worry, I will just ask her if everything is okay." When we stopped the car, she looked at us and said that her car had a dead battery and she needed some help. She was in her 40s, maybe 50s, with long gray hair which looked really dirty. At this point, I was wondering how this situation was possible. We were talking with a totally random woman in the middle of the night in the middle of a forest. In hindsight, it seemed completely weird and dangerous, but at that moment, my friend was totally fine with the situation. It was a mix of his conscience and kindness, I think. As I was thinking about the situation, the woman continued to speak and said that her car was on a forest road just to the right of the main road. She showed us a tiny muddy path which was going deep into the woods. I looked at my friend and he looked at me, raised his shoulder and told the woman, "Okay, you can walk in front of the car, we will follow you." She smiled at us and said, "Thanks, you're really nice, I wasn't expecting people like you." She started to walk and we followed her slowly. As we were going deeper into the woods, we started to become more nervous. We weren't able to see the road behind us anymore. My friend started to realize that it was maybe a mistake. During this whole time, I was trying to explain to him how creepy this situation was. Finally, we arrived at the entrance of a clearing. That's when things started to become really creepy. First, there was no car, but an abandoned house with the roof completely destroyed and 2 caravans. It looked like a gypsy camp or some other type of travel group. Secondly, the woman started to run to the caravans and disappeared behind them. At this point, it was clear it was some kind of ambush or foul play. My friend immediately went back in reverse. As we were leaving as fast as the road was permitting it, the woman reappeared and ran to our car. She wasn't saying anything, just running. My friend accelerated in reverse, and we managed to make it back to the main road and leave very quickly. We immediately went to the police station a few dozen miles away. When we told them our story, they said we weren't the first. It appeared it was a caravan of weirdos who were living out there, trying to lure away drivers by asking for help. All the people in the area knew them, so they were aware of them, and it was a very remote road, and there weren't a lot of strangers passing by. I'm not sure what was going on in that clearing, but I hope the police shut it down, or the caravans moved on before they got any other out-of-towners to fall for their trick. I used to go to Chuck E. Cheese sometimes when I was a kid, and I always enjoyed it. I would play the arcade games and eat the pizza that they had, which was really good. Several of my friends had birthday parties there, and I had one once as well. But my scariest experience happened one time when I went there with my best friend David. I was 7 years old, but I remember it like it was last week. I just remember that we were there on, I believe, a Saturday morning, and we got a bunch of coins and started playing all the arcade games. David's mom took us there, and I was going to David's house to hang out afterwards. After playing arcade games and winning tickets for a while, I remember that I was standing not too far away from the playground area. There was a spot that was basically like a play place that you would see at a McDonald's or Burger King. It was a slide with some monkey bars and tunnels and stuff that you could crawl through. I glanced over and I saw a kid looking through the window of one of the elevated tunnels leading to a slide. He was just staring at me really intensely. The kid was maybe a couple of years older than me, and I didn't recognize him. I even looked around wondering if he was staring at me or somebody else, but he was definitely staring right at me, and it was really weird. I looked away and then I moved to another area out of view of the kid. After that, I pretty much forgot about it and moved on to some other game. Maybe like an hour later though, I was still in the arcade with David. I remember that I noticed the kid that was staring at me again. He was staring at me once more with the wide eyes and intense stare. I was sure that he was trying to scare me or prank me and was joking around, but it was still really weird. He was standing really far away this time and basically on the complete other end of the arcade. Once more, I decided to just walk away. I went to another area and played a different game there. I thought the kid was pretty strange that was staring at me, but I just did my best to forget about it. And pretty quickly, I was able to. We stayed at the Chuck E. Cheese for maybe another hour or two, I'm not sure exactly. Then David's mom took us back to David's house, which was not that far away from the Chuck E. Cheese. When we got back, David and I mostly hung out in his living room. I'm pretty sure that we just played video games and some other stuff around the house. The next thing I really remember though was at nighttime. My mom was going to come and pick me up pretty soon, but in the meantime, I was in the living room with David, which was at the front of the house. I remember that I looked out of David's front window into the street. By now it was dark out, and I saw what appeared to be the same kid from Chuck E. Cheese standing in the street. He was staring at me once again with wide eyes like before. It was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. David saw him as well, and we both quickly covered the windows with the shades. After that, we didn't look back out of the windows until my mom was there. When I left, I did not see the kid anymore, so he must have gone. I remember telling my mom about it, but she didn't seem too concerned. I think she thought I was exaggerating, or she just didn't think it was that weird. But I still think it was really weird to this day. I'm not sure if the kid was one of David's neighbors. David didn't seem to recognize him. I guess it's still possible though, and to me, that's the only thing that makes sense. Overall, I still don't know why the kid would stare at me like that, especially to stand out in the street at night. It was very strange. Luckily, I never saw that kid again after that. Our landlord is a complete creep with no boundaries. We rent an upper level of a duplex, and our landlord lives on the main floor. I moved in and have been happily renting for the last 6 years. My landlord has always been kind, cordial, helpful, and treated me like family, often exchanging Christmas gifts, congratulating me on new jobs, and even giving me a gift card when I completed college. The rent is cheap too, which is nice. 2 years ago, my boyfriend moved in with me, and it's been a hectic 2 years of combining households and trying to get organized while quickly realizing we're outgrowing our space. My landlord also retired from his job and has been home more. Within the last year, though, things have gotten weird around the apartment. Over the winter, our landlord stopped us on the way out the door when we were headed to work. He told us that we needed to clean the place up a bit as he had been poking around and noticed that it was messy. Undeniably, we were a bit disheveled from the holidays, so we both took some time off of work and got the apartment cleaned up well. But we were still disturbed by the comments of him coming into our home without our knowledge, so we purchased a security camera and waited to see what happened. Much to our horror, we found that the landlord has been entering our home without notice multiple times a week to gain access to the attic that he uses for storage. However, it's never an innocent trip up to the attic. He stops and checks each and every room to evaluate the cleanliness. I won't pretend we're the cleanest people out there, but we don't leave trash lying out. Our dishes are done, and we take care and make sure that we clean up everything that might attract mice or bugs. I would say it's not out of control at all. We have also realized our need to downsize and have secured a storage unit and have been slowly packing things we don't use and taking them to storage. Recently, we had 2 bats in our home. Most recently, there was one in our washer. Our landlord decided to call somebody to check the house for entry points. We both work evenings and are up late, so we asked when the earliest time of day was acceptable for somebody to come out. We told him we're more than willing to accommodate any time of day with proper notice. We never heard back. I woke up today to go to the bathroom and noticed my front door was open and our attic was open. I received a text message from the landlord at 10 a.m. saying that the bat guy would be there within an hour and a call at 10:44 that I had missed. I checked our camera and saw that our landlord entered our apartment without notice while we were sleeping. He made a point to move some of the totes out of the way that needed to go to storage, and then he moved them back to where they were previously to make it appear that he hadn't been there. All the thoughts running through my head of, what if I had been walking around naked, or what if I heard it and thought it was an intruder and tried to defend myself and inadvertently hurt someone? Our landlord knows our sleeping times and he knows our work schedule, and we are essentially at his mercy. At this point, we live in a state of constant anxiety about our landlord just entering our home without permission. I want to say something, but at the same time, I have a fear of being asked to leave for saying something. Our apartment is the cheapest place in town, and it's helping us on our path to saving for a home in the coming year. With all these events though, it has us questioning what we should do and if there's any legal action we can take. At the very least, it's incredibly uncomfortable to know that somebody walks through your home unannounced whenever they seem fit, and they think it's okay to do surprise inspections of our living space. I often wonder how many times in the last 6 years he's done this, and long before I had cameras, if he's ever watched me sleep or even set up cameras himself, something creepy like that. Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill, we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there, we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor. So we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later, we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon, we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. A couple of years ago, I was traveling with my best friend Charlotte. We've traveled together several times now, but this was by far the scariest thing that ever happened. After our flight, we booked a hotel not too far away for the entire time that we were staying. We took an Uber there, and the hotel was pretty average for the most part. It was nothing fancy, but also nothing was really bad about it either. It was clean, and the staff was friendly, and they had a continental breakfast as well. So, I remember after being out for most of the first day, Charlotte and I got back to the hotel sometime at night. We were hanging out in the room when we noticed this one guy out the window. Our room was on the second floor, and it overlooked mostly the parking lot that was behind the hotel. It was not too busy because there was another parking lot out front where most of the people parked. The man was standing sort of at the far back of the parking lot, almost at the end of it, and he appeared to be looking right at us. Our window was not open, but we did not have any shades covering the window, so it seemed like the man could see into the room. We looked at him, and he was definitely looking right at us. The guy appeared to be somewhat short, had a goatee, and sort of long hair. He motioned to us, but I couldn't quite tell what he was doing. We were both kind of confused as to what he wanted. Then we heard him yell something at us, but I couldn't make it out. Our window was closed, and he wasn't quite loud enough. Then he pointed at us and said something else. He didn't necessarily seem angry or anything, but it was just kind of weird. Then, after pointing at us for like 10 seconds, the man started to jog through the parking lot closer to the hotel. It seemed like maybe he was going to go inside. We were a little concerned that he might go to our room or something, and the whole thing was kind of weird, so we decided to cover the windows at that point. About 5 minutes later, we heard a knock on our door. We got completely silent, and then I went over as quietly as I could and got to the door. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the man was standing there. We did not know what he wanted. He stood by the door and kind of looked around. After staying at the door for like 15 or 20 seconds, the man then moved along and walked away. We thought that we heard him knocking on another door, so maybe he didn't quite know which room was ours. Either way, it was kind of strange, and we weren't sure what the guy was doing. There's no way that we were answering the door for him though. So the rest of the night was fine. We hung out a while longer and then went to sleep. The next morning, Charlotte and I went down to the first floor for the continental breakfast. When we got there, there were quite a few other people. However, right after arriving, we noticed the same guy. He was standing on the far other end of the room holding a cup of coffee. As soon as we saw him, he seemed to see us. Then he started walking over in our direction. Charlotte and I both had a really bad feeling about the guy, so we decided to just go back to the room. We quickly turned around and went back. After getting back to the room, we decided to just leave the hotel and go on with our plans for the day. When we left the hotel, we didn't see the man. We were gone for the whole day and arrived back sometime that night. I remember that things were quiet by that point. We walked through the lobby and then went up to the second floor to get to our room. As we were walking down the hallway to our room, we heard someone at the far other end of the hall. I didn't really think anything of it, but I looked over and then noticed that the man was there. He was walking in our direction and also walking really fast. Charlotte noticed too and tried to hurry up and put the key in the door. She got it open and we both quickly went inside. We slammed the door shut behind us. Probably 10 seconds later, the man arrived at the door and tried to open it. Then he quickly knocked on the door. We called down to the front desk and reported the man. He walked away from the door after we didn't answer again. We were nervous that we would keep seeing him, but he didn't come back that night and we didn't see him the next day or for the rest of our trip. I guess either the hotel staff found him and kicked him out or something, or maybe he just realized that we wanted nothing to do with him and left. Either way, I'm really glad that he never got into the room, and I'm glad that we never answered the door for him.
work at a baseball stadium part-time during the summers. Last summer, I worked just about every home game. This story takes place one time after we had a night game. One of my duties at work is to help clean the stadium when the game is over. Many times, we will have it ready for another game the very next day. So each of us are assigned a certain section to clean and have instructions on how to clean it. There are so many of us that the entire stadium can be good to go within an hour or two of the game ending. So on this night game in particular, the stadium was pretty busy while the game was going on. After it ended, there's usually an extremely busy time of about 10 minutes. That's when everybody is leaving and the concourse is usually packed. Then things very quickly start to quiet down. I remember that I was busy between the seats in the section that I was in and the concourse nearby. There was just one other coworker with me in that particular section. I just know that probably 20 minutes after the game, things were much quieter, and I told my coworker that I would go clean the bathrooms on this night. He would stay out in the seats picking up trash that was left there. So I first went into the restrooms and checked, and there was just one person that was in a stall in the men's restroom. Meanwhile, the women's was empty, and as far as the concourse, by now, almost 30 minutes after the game, virtually all fans were gone. There was just a few here and there who were taking their time to leave. I went ahead and cleaned the women's restroom, which took me maybe 10 minutes. Then when I came out, I went to go do the men's. I was sure by now that it would be empty, but there was still a person in one of the stalls. I thought about asking them to leave, but I decided to give it a couple more minutes. So I went out and changed a trash can in the concourse. This took me several minutes, but the man still hadn't left the restrooms. So at that point, I decided to go inside and ask him to leave. When I entered the restroom though, the one stall was still closed, but it didn't look like anybody was inside. I didn't see the feet at the bottom like I had before. I asked if anybody was in there, but I got no response. I announced that I had to clean and then started to do so. When I got to the stall that was closed, I knocked on it one last time. There was nothing in response. I started to wonder to myself if the stall had just been closed the whole time and nobody was in there. After not getting a response, I started to go underneath it to unlock the door. When I did, I saw a man standing on the toilet, luckily fully clothed. He was looking right at me, and it was a huge surprise. I moved back and said that he had to leave now. The man didn't do anything. I asked if he was okay or if he could hear me. He didn't say anything back to me, but a second later, there was a loud bang from the other side of the door. It was like the man was pounding on it as hard as he possibly could. This happened several more times. At that point, I left the bathroom and decided to tell my coworker that was in the area. So I went back out into the concourse and then into the seats. I located my coworker and told him of the problem. At first, he thought it was funny and wanted to talk to the guy. So we both went back and entered the men's restroom. When we went inside though, the man was gone. All of the stall doors were still open. I was happy that he was gone, and then my coworker left to go back to the seats. I finished up and cleaned the rest of the men's room. Then I left and was going to join in helping my coworker in the seats. That would always take the longest. But as I re-entered the concourse from the restrooms, something caught my eye. There was a few things used for concessions that were moved off to the side. One of them was a small fridge. It was a full-sized fridge with Pepsi and other soft drinks in it. I don't know how, but I noticed a man was hiding behind it. When I saw this, I started to walk over. I got within maybe 10 feet, and the man quickly moved out from behind the fridge. Then he ran past me and headed towards the seating area. Now we were on the 100 level, which is the closest to the field. I ran after the guy, and he entered the seating area where my coworker was. The man ran down the aisle and past my coworker. He got all the way to the field, and then jumped over the wall and went onto the playing field. There were a few grounds crew workers out there. The man ran all the way to the outfield before we saw a security guard catch up with him. Finally, he was caught and escorted off the field. My coworker and I both laughed at that point, but it was actually pretty creepy to me before that. I had no clue why the man was hiding in the restroom for so long. I'm not sure why he did that, but it was a memorable night. The
This is the story of my scariest experience going to a sports game. And my team only won 5 games last year. Talk about horror. Anyways, I won't say which team is my favorite, but it's an American football team. The games are always packed, and I'm sure to go to several each year. Because of how many people go to every game, parking can be a bit of a nightmare. I live pretty close by, but not close enough that I can walk or anything. I obviously have to drive. So for this game, I parked sort of far from the stadium. I had researched a little bit beforehand, and I was able to park for free in a Target parking lot. It was a night game, and I arrived about an hour before kickoff. I was meeting a friend there who took an Uber from his work. So after parking towards the back of the Target parking lot, I saw that nobody else going to the game seemed to be parking here. I left and soon got onto a sidewalk. I thought that it was going to take me forever to walk there, but it actually wasn't really that long. By the time I arrived at the stadium, I felt like a genius. I got to park for free, and probably wouldn't have to deal with much traffic afterwards. When I was close to the stadium, I caught up with the huge mob of people that was entering. I was able to find my friend, and then we went inside. We got to our seats and then watched the game. It went by mostly normal. Where things got strange was after the game. So when it was over, I stayed back and talked with my friend for a while. Then we headed for the exits and left. There was still a ton of people around. So my friend and I went our separate ways, and I started walking back to my car. Now I would say that it would take me about 15 minutes to walk back, maybe 20. At first, there were lots of other people walking along the sidewalk with me. Then, the farther I went, the less people there were. Soon, it was just me. I continued to walk, and when crossing a street, I noticed that there was actually one person that was walking behind me. He was a ways back, though. I kept going, thinking that I was heading in the right direction of my vehicle. The man behind me continued walking with me. I thought at first that maybe he also parked at the Target or nearby. We kept going, but I soon realized that I had got my directions mixed up. I accidentally went about 2 blocks in the wrong direction. So I took out my phone and I looked up the correct way. Then I was back on track. Several minutes later, things were very dark and quiet, but I could still hear the footsteps behind me. They sounded slightly closer than before. I glanced over my shoulder. The guy was still there walking behind me. It was a little bit weird now because of the fact that I had drastically changed my direction. I mean, why would he still be following me? I just ignored it though. We kept walking, and soon the Target was in sight. By now, it was around 11 p.m., and the Target had closed at 10. My car was basically the only one in the entire parking lot. There were a few other vehicles a long ways away on the other side, but mine was the only one in the area. When I approached, the man was still trailing me, but even closer now. At that point, I was really suspicious. I walked faster and then entered the parking lot. I thought that I heard the guy behind me start to jog, so I did as well. I jogged all the way to my car. I unlocked it from a distance away so that I could get inside quickly. When I had made it within maybe 50 feet of the car, I started sprinting. It was apparent that the man was chasing after me now for some reason. I was probably 30 feet in front of the guy. I reached my car, opened the door, and got inside. Then I locked the doors instantly and started the engine. As I was starting it up, the man reached my car and tried opening it. When it wouldn't, he got about 2 punches in at my driver's window, which held up. Then I quickly drove out of there, leaving the man standing in the mostly empty parking lot. After leaving, I called the police and reported what happened to them. Then I drove back home. Since that experience, I haven't parked in that Target parking lot for a night game. I have for day games though, and nothing else like that has happened. I think that the man was attempting to rob me, either from my car or whatever else I had. I'm not sure why he chose to follow me though. I don't remember seeing him at all during the game or anything, and hopefully I never see him again. For some background to this story, I'm a female, and this event took place when I went to a basketball game with some friends. We were going to a night game at the arena in the city. I carpooled with some friends,
and 4 of us went together in total. We took Caitlin's car, which was an SUV, so it had the most amount of space. Now we parked in a parking ramp very close to the stadium, which is downtown in a major city. After arriving, we got to our seats and were watching the game. We had pretty good seats and were sitting in the first level about 20 rows up from the floor. At one point, I don't remember exactly when, I got up to get some food. For some reason, nobody came with me. I don't remember why. Anyways, I went over and was in line, and the guy behind me started hitting on me. He was trying to flirt and stuff, and I really wasn't interested in him. He was taller than me, maybe 6 feet tall, smelled badly, and wore a baggy sweatshirt and a hat. Now, I wasn't rude to the guy, but when he asked me for my number, I told him that I wasn't interested. He left me alone for a short time, but after ordering food, I left to go back to my seats. The guy stopped me and stood in front of me. He asked me where I was sitting and asked if he could sit with me. I told him no, I was sitting with my friends. Then I walked away. He didn't follow me then, but when I got back to my seats, about 5 minutes later, I saw the guy. He was standing in the aisle and he waved at me. Now, there were literally no open seats around us. I didn't think that he was sitting near us, but at first I wasn't sure. The guy was in the aisle, blocking people's view, and I guess trying to find a way to get to us. After standing there for like a minute, somebody told him to sit down. This finally got him to walk away. He went back up the aisle and left the section. I couldn't believe that he had actually come down and tried to sit near us. For the rest of the game, I did not see him. I ended up forgetting about the interaction for the most part. When the game was over, the 4 of us left the stadium. Right outside, there was a large crowd of people who were all leaving the arena like us. In the midst of this, I saw the man again, but not before he saw me. By the time I noticed him, he was already looking at me and walking in my direction. My friends and I then tried to quickly walk away. The man literally followed us all the way to the parking garage. He was trying to talk to me and stuff, but I told him that I was not interested. So we got inside the parking structure and then went inside of Caitlin's car. I didn't notice the man when we were in there, and when we got in the car, I was sitting in the back, and we left. At first, we got stuck in traffic, but it didn't last for very long. During the entire drive back, I was talking with my friends and completely distracted. Now, my apartment is not that far outside of the city, so I was dropped off first. Caitlin pulled over to the side of the road in front of my building. I said bye to my friends and then got out. Then they drove off. Right when I started walking to my apartment, I noticed that another car was pulled over on the side of the road with the lights on. It was behind where we had been. Then the lights turned off and the driver's door opened. As I was walking, I saw the same guy get out. I was so surprised and had no idea where he had come from. He was a ways away, and I did my best to go to the front door of my apartment quickly. He was walking right over to me. I could not believe the nerve on this guy. I made it to the front door and used my key fob to open it. I made sure to close it right behind me so the guy couldn't get in. He tried opening the locked door, but couldn't get in. I went to the elevator and got up to my floor where my apartment was. When I got inside, I looked out of my window to the front sidewalk, but I didn't see the guy leaving. My building was not very big. I would say it's about average size. There's really just a small lobby, and then 4 levels, which are all just a straight hallway. I just hoped that the man wouldn't make it inside. Probably 10 minutes later though, I remember I checked out of the window again and still didn't see him. I noticed that his car was still there though. I hoped that he was maybe inside of his car and going to leave for good, but I couldn't tell if anybody was in the driver's seat or not. A short time later though, I remember randomly hearing footsteps outside in the hallway. Now it could have been anybody, but for some reason I had a feeling that it was the same guy, and I went over and looked. I walked to my front door and looked through the peephole. I was just in time to see the guy walking past my door. He didn't look at my door or anything and didn't stop. I'm pretty sure he had no idea which apartment was mine. I decided to try to just forget about this guy. After that, I went to bed. The next day, obviously, he was no longer in the building, and since then, I haven't seen him. I still can't believe that he followed us back though. We must have just not noticed him. I'm not sure what he would have tried to do if he knew which apartment was mine. Possibly break in or knock on the door. I'm glad I didn't have to find out though. This is something that happened last year when I went to my boyfriend's soccer game. He plays in this league that's not professional or college or anything, but it's still taken very seriously. Most games are at nearby parks depending on who they play. I go there sometimes here and there, and usually there are maybe 20 people that watch. Most of them are other wives and girlfriends like me. One time, the game was at a park that was about 10 minutes away, and it was a night game. I went to watch, and there was a game going on before my boyfriend's, so his game didn't start until about 8:30 p.m. Not very many people stuck around that late to watch it, plus it was kind of cold. I remember that it was also a bit foggy out, and there was just one set of bleachers that I was sitting in. I went and sat at the very top, and there was just a couple of people scattered around at the bottom. The field was surrounded by woods on 3 sides of it. Then, on one end, there was an open field, which led to a small park building. Past that and to the left was the parking lot. So I was sitting up in the bleachers and watching the game. I remember at one point I heard this noise behind me in the woods. It sounded like maybe an animal was moving through it. It had to be pretty loud though in order for me to notice. Being at the top back of the bleachers, I was probably 20 feet above ground and could look back into the wooded area. So I looked out to see what was there. I saw some movement of where the noise was coming from, but I couldn't tell what it was. The soccer game wasn't really that exciting at the moment, so I got up from the bleachers and walked around to look. Once I was there, I could still hear the noise. The woods was very dense, but I could get a better view on the ground than from up in the bleachers. When I got close, the noise stopped. I was looking around, trying to see what it was. It seemed like it was coming from maybe 20 feet in or so. It was very dark back there. Then I just happened to notice there was a man standing in the woods. It was kind of strange because there was no path going in those woods or anything. And the man was also staring right at me. His eyes were real wide, and I walked away when I saw him. I went right back to the bleachers and sat down again. I wasn't sure what the guy was doing there, but it was kind of strange. So I pretty much just watched the game for the next 30 minutes or so. In a break in the action, I got up to use the restroom over at the building. This was a pretty long walk, and nobody else was around. After doing so, I emerged to see the man standing not that far away from me. He was just staring at me again, and standing just outside of the woods, but now all the way over here. I began walking back to the bleachers, and the man remained standing there at first, but then he actually started walking back after me. I remember that he was trailing me almost the entire way back to the field, but he was a good distance behind me. Once I got to the field though, he sort of stopped. Then I got back to the bleachers and continued watching the game. I looked over, but did not see the man anymore. I didn't see him for the rest of the game either. I was a little creeped out by his odd behavior. After a while longer, the game finally ended. My boyfriend and I then started walking back to the parking lot. I remember that when we made it there, we saw the strange man standing near our vehicle. This was just really weird. The guy was just standing there staring at us. We kept walking closer, but I honestly didn't want to get that close to him. When we made it within probably 10 feet of the guy, he just turned and then ran off into the woods. It was very strange. We left after that, but I've always been wondering ever since then what the guy was doing. This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 10 years old at the time. I played basketball growing up and would be on a team with a bunch of friends. One Saturday, my team was playing in a tournament at a local high school. In these tournaments, there would be a bunch of teams, and you would usually play about 2 games in a day. So I remember that we played a game in the morning in the high school, and we had some time before our next game, I think a couple of hours. So we were supposed to hang around the school. Most of my teammates were hanging out in the bleachers and watching the other games. I did that for a while, but my friend and I got kind of bored and wandered off. We started basically exploring the school. After walking around for a while, we came into this hallway at one end. We were far away from the gym, and every hallway was completely empty with it being a Saturday. I don't remember what we were doing back there other than just walking around. But in that hallway, I remember this guy came out of one of the classrooms. The lights had been off in the classroom, so I'm not sure what he was doing in there. I didn't recognize him at all either. He just appeared to be some guy, not a teacher or coach or anything. I remember that he approached us and asked us what we were doing back there. We said we were just walking around. I wasn't sure if we were in trouble and not supposed to go back there or what. But then I remember that the guy started basically trying to get us to leave with him. He was asking us to go to his car. We knew better though and said no to him, but he kept trying to convince us. I remember thinking that he had to be joking at first, but after a while I realized he was serious. After he was talking to us for maybe 5 minutes, I remember that out of nowhere we both just turned and ran. We went all the way back to the gym. The man didn't chase after us and stayed where he was. It was pretty weird, and I didn't want to leave the basketball area for the rest of the day. Next to the gymnasium was the cafeteria of the school. There were concessions there and a decent amount of people hanging out. I went back in the gym, and after a while, I went out to get something to eat. When I did, I noticed the man. He was standing very far away in a hallway and looking at me. I remember that I ran back in the gym after I saw him. After that, I didn't see him for the rest of the time there. Sometimes I wonder what the guy was doing there and who he was. I'm really glad that my friend and I just ran away and ignored him.
One time back in the 1990s when I was in high school, I was left home alone. Me being home by myself was something that very rarely happened because I have a large family. Living in the house was my parents, my older brother and sister, me, and then my 2 younger sisters as well. So with all those people, the chances were that somebody would be home pretty much all the time. Now, I don't remember where everyone had to go on this particular night, but it just so happened that everyone had places to go except for me. So for a few hours that night, I would have the house to myself. I was not nervous at all because I wasn't a little kid, I was in high school, but it still felt really odd just because I was not used to it. I remember that the house felt very quiet. It was dark outside, and our neighborhood was pretty typical. A good amount of other houses on the street, but things were mostly pretty quiet. At one point, maybe an hour or 2 into being home by myself, I went downstairs from my room to go to the kitchen. This was on the main floor and towards the back of the house. There I was getting something to drink when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Much of the lights in the house were off, so I could see out the back windows better. We had a door that led out to the back patio, and I saw someone outside approaching it. I could tell right away though that it was not my parents and none of my siblings. It looked like some random guy. He didn't seem to notice me because I was entering the kitchen from an angle that was not really in his line of vision. Plus, it was mostly dark in the house. It was like right when I came around the corner to enter the kitchen, I saw him. I stopped and froze where I was. The man continued to approach the back door. I was now in the kitchen and near this door that led down to the basement. I then looked back over at the door where the man was headed and realized that it was unlocked. This gave me a terrible feeling of panic. In that split second, I did what was kind of a reaction to that, and I quickly opened up the basement door, which I was very close to. It was already slightly open, and I went inside and then shut the door behind me. Just when I did, I heard the back door to the house opening. I then quickly ran down the stairs. Our basement was finished, but there wasn't much down there. The stairs had carpet, which I'm glad for because it made my footsteps very quiet. I then went into kind of the main basement area where we had a couch and an old TV. We had some blankets on the floor next to the couch, and I literally hid under them. At first, when I got down there, I heard footsteps upstairs of the man walking. I could not tell where he was going though. I just hoped that he wouldn't go down into the basement where I was. I wanted to call my parents or the police, but could not. I didn't have a cell phone back then, and we did not have a home phone in the basement, only upstairs. I hid under the blankets for the longest time, and I didn't hear or see anything as I was covered. After I'm not even sure how long, I finally got up the courage to get up. I emerged and did not hear anything. The man had definitely not come down to the basement. After listening and not hearing anything at all for a while, I carefully made my way back up the stairs. When I got up to the top, I slowly and quietly opened the door to the kitchen from the basement. I looked around and saw nothing. There was a phone in the kitchen though, so I just needed to get it. After I got the phone, I then brought it back down to the basement. In that time, I still heard and saw nothing. I was hoping that the man had left. I called the police from the basement and told them that a man had entered our house, and I gave them the address. I didn't know if the guy was still there or not, but I knew that I should call to be safe. So I waited down in the basement until the cops got there, and I figured that the man was probably long gone by now. When the police arrived, I went upstairs and let them into the house. Then the police searched the entire place. To my surprise, they found the man hiding upstairs in my bedroom of all places. I was shocked. My parents got home not long after, as well as some of my siblings. I don't remember a whole lot after that, but it was certainly a crazy experience. I do not know exactly why the man chose our house, or if there was a reason he went to my room. The back door had been left unlocked with so many of us living there and coming and going, but after that, everyone always made sure to lock it. This is something that happened really not that long ago. I live alone by myself in my apartment, which is on the first floor of a standard fairly new building. As I sat by myself in the living room one night, I got a text on my cell phone out of nowhere. The text read, "I'm watching you," in all capitals. It was from a number that I did not recognize, so I had no idea who it was. When I saw this, my first reaction, and also hope, was that it was a joke by one of my friends. But part of me also felt creeped out by it. I didn't know how they would have an unknown number if it was a friend, but I also did not know who would do something like this. But I mean, come on, it just had to be a prank. That's what I was telling myself. I texted back asking who it was that was texting me. Not too long after this, I got a response. They said, "The person that is watching you," once more in all caps. I guess I should have expected an answer like that. Now, I had all my windows closed and covered in my apartment, so I found it impossible for somebody to actually be watching me. But now I was feeling paranoid. My place is small, just one bedroom, a bathroom, and then a pretty large space with a kitchen and living room in it. Still, I went around and checked all my closets and rooms and confirmed that I was alone. Then I checked out my peephole and opened my door to the hallway. The coast was clear. Finally, I went around and looked out my windows to the surroundings. My windows looked out to the parking lot, which had a good amount of cars in it, but I didn't see anybody out there at all. So it was hard to tell if anyone was watching me or not, but it sure didn't seem like it. I saw nothing obvious, but if somehow this person was in the parking lot or something like that, they couldn't see me. All they would see is my windows, because I had shades over them. I felt safe in my place, but I was still really creeped out by this. I almost texted back again, but then I decided to just block the number. If this was a prank by one of my friends, I didn't find it funny, and by blocking them, it would probably get whoever was doing it to fess up. However, I did not receive any texts at all. For the rest of the night when I was up, nothing strange happened. I felt a little spooked and checked out the windows every so often, but everything seemed fine. So that night, I was about to go to sleep. I was in my bed just doing some reading before falling asleep. Out of nowhere, I heard this knocking at my front door. It was not that loud, but it was constant. A repeated knocking sound that just kept going. I was too creeped out to get up and see who was there. I knew that my doors were locked, so I just hoped that the person would not try to break in or anything. I also instantly connected it to the texts, and this whole situation now seemed 10 times scarier. I got out my phone, ready to call the cops. The knocking went on for probably about a minute straight. Then it stopped. I was still too freaked out to move for a while. Finally, I got up and left my bedroom. I went to the peephole of my apartment and looked, but the person was gone. I stayed up for hours after that, too scared to sleep. I didn't get any more texts, and I didn't get any more knocks on the door either. I was finally able to fall asleep really late. The next day, things were fine. Since then, I haven't received any texts or strange knocks on the door. I still don't know who it was. I thought maybe it could have been a neighbor, but I obviously have no proof of that. I really have no clue. To come to my actual door and knock on it so late at night seems too far-fetched to be a prank. And if it was one of my friends, I would think that they would have said something about it by now. I still don't know who did that or why. My husband travels a lot for work, so I'm home by myself quite often in our house. This was a couple of years ago now, and he was away for several days. So one night I was in our bedroom FaceTiming him as he was in his hotel. We often FaceTime every night when we're away from each other. We talked for a while, and it was getting late, so we said goodnight to each other and then hung up. My husband said that he was going to sleep now, and I was already in bed, but not that tired yet. So I put on a show and laid in bed watching it. Roughly 30 minutes later, I heard something from downstairs. It kind of sounded like someone had knocked on the door. I didn't hear it very clearly though. I was upstairs, so it was pretty far away. I listened closer, wondering if I was just imagining it or if it was possibly something else. About 30 seconds later, I heard it again. It did sound like someone was knocking at the front door. Still, I didn't hear it very clearly. I got up from my bed and looked out of our bedroom window at first, but it did not have a view of the front door, and I saw nothing. So I went out of the room to another window upstairs which would have a view of the front door area. When I got there, I looked out the window and I saw a man wearing a hooded jacket walking through our front yard. But he was moving away from the front door area and moving towards the garage. He soon went out of my sight. I didn't know who this guy was or what he was doing, but it seemed very suspicious. Why would he come to the door so late at night? And he didn't look like any of our neighbors, although I couldn't see his face. I just hoped that he would leave our property. So I went over and went downstairs, and then looked through several windows, including the front door window. Everywhere I looked, though, I didn't see the man at all. I thought that there was a good chance he had left, and that's what I was hoping. Still, I made sure that every door was locked and every window was covered. I was still feeling creeped out, though, so I tried to call my husband, but he didn't answer because he was asleep. I turned on a light to the front door outside to try to make myself feel better. Maybe if the guy came back, he would see that a light was on and leave. My fear was that he would try to break in. So I went back upstairs at that point and got back in bed. This time, I did not hear any more noises, and I soon was able to relax and eventually fall asleep. However, I was awoken in the night. The first thing I remember after waking up was hearing the sound of one of the neighbors' dogs barking. I think that's what woke me up, and usually we didn't have any problems with the neighbors' dogs at all. Sometimes they might bark a little here and there during the day, but I had never woken up in the night to them that I can recall before. I didn't know whose dog exactly it was, because several of our neighbors have them. The dog was barking repeatedly and pretty loud. I was quickly wide awake. Out of curiosity and a little bit out of suspicion from earlier, I went downstairs. When I got there, I looked out of several windows, but everything seemed fine. I saw nothing. And shortly after I got down there, the dog stopped barking. So at that point, I went back upstairs and once more fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up, and things seemed fine. It was now bright and sunny outside, and I walked outside. However, when I got to the back patio area, I saw something that left me speechless. By the back door, there were a bunch of marks on the wall right next to it, and some on the door as well. It looked as though someone had been trying to pry the door open. The marks had certainly not been there before. I was shocked, and I took pictures and sent them to my husband. He told me to call the police. I realized that it was possibly from the man I had seen the previous night. I then also realized that the dog barking was probably from the man in our backyard. A neighbor's dog must have seen him and started barking, and that's probably what scared the man off. Had that not happened, he may have broken into our house. The police came out and I told them everything. My husband told me that I should stay at my parents' house until he got back, and I did that because I was too creeped out to stay in our house by myself. The man did not return though. When my husband returned, we ended up getting a camera set up, but nothing suspicious has happened like that since then. I'm grateful to the neighbor's dog for possibly saving me or saving our house from being robbed. This is something that happened back when I was in college. During my freshman year, I lived alone in a dorm room, which was in an all-girls building. It was a pretty standard place, where I just had my bed, a desk, a dresser in the room, and then a few things that I had brought. I also had a small couch and a mini fridge. But there was no bathroom in my room, so there was a community bathroom down the hallway that everybody would share. It wasn't too bad though, because the bathroom had about 8 small individual rooms in it. So one night I stayed up really late doing homework. I was probably up until around midnight working on assignments and studying. This is not something that I did every single night, but sometimes you have to. So after finally getting done with homework, I went to use the bathroom before going to bed. I left my dorm room, took a right down the hallway, and then made a left to the bathroom, which were a ways down. I never bothered to lock my door when I would use the bathroom, because I would just be gone for a few minutes. Plus, nobody was out in the hallways or anything. There really wasn't a need to. There were locks from the outside to the building anyways. When I went to the bathroom, nobody else was in there, and things were completely silent. I was in there for a few minutes brushing my teeth, and then when I came back to my room, I went inside. All my lights were off except for a lamp in the corner at my desk, and the TV was playing at a low volume. I went to the desk, turned off the lamp, and then got into my bed. So I remember that I was facing the wall, and I closed my eyes, and within probably a minute started to drift off to sleep. However, suddenly I heard the sound of my door opening. When I heard it, I shot up in bed and then turned over to the door to see what was happening. I just barely saw what appeared to be a man leaving my dorm room. I didn't see his face at all, just part of the back of him. He shut the door behind him and was gone. I was so confused, but I knew that a man was not supposed to be in here at all. I got up and quickly went over to the door and locked it. Then I decided to call campus safety and report it. An officer came to the building and looked around, but found no one. So whoever had been there was now gone. I was still very confused. After that, nothing else crazy like that happened in my time in college, but I still don't know what exactly happened that night. I figured that the man entered my dorm room when I was in the bathroom. There's no way I wouldn't have seen or heard him if he was in my room prior to that. There's also some places that he could have hid temporarily, and with pretty much all the lights off, I might not have seen him. I still can't believe that he was in my room at all, though. I'm glad that he left, and for a short time I thought that maybe he just had the wrong room. But why would he hide like that? I really don't know what was happening there. At the end of the day, I'm just glad that he left and that nothing bad happened. Something really weird happened at my apartment a few months ago. So, I live by myself. I have a one-bedroom apartment and I've been living here for a few years. For the most part, it's a pretty nice building. There's several levels and I'm on the second floor. I have many neighbors, but I don't really know any of them and I don't see them too often. One night, I was at home by myself and there was a knock at my front door very late. It was probably close to midnight. So right away, I knew that something was off. I wasn't expecting anyone. This rose my suspicions and I went to the door to see who was there. When I looked through the small peephole in the door to the other side, I saw something strange. There was a man standing there wearing a suit and sunglasses. For whatever reason, I do not know why, I decided to answer the door. Even though it was creepy and late at night, I guess I just felt brave, or like the guy wouldn't do anything bad. I opened the door and the guy just stood there a couple of steps away looking at me. But when I opened it, I also noticed that there were 4 other guys all wearing suits and sunglasses. It was the weirdest thing. They were standing farther back, a slight ways down the hallway. I asked if I could help them, and I'm sure that I seemed very confused because I was. The man in front of me seemed to look at me, as did the others, but nobody said anything. I looked at everyone else, and they were all just staring at me. I asked them who they were and what they were doing. They all just stared at me, but said nothing. Then, at once just about, every single one of them began to walk towards me. It started with the guys that were farther away, and then the guy right in front of me started to approach as well. I did the logical thing, which was to slam the door very quickly and then lock it. When I did, they actually tried to open my door. I yelled that I was going to call the cops. They stopped trying to open the door, but this did not scare them off. Now all the men just stood in the hallway staring at my door. I watched through the peephole. They were all just looking at my door, standing next to each other. I was so creeped out. I didn't leave the door and just kept watching them. I was debating actually calling the cops. This went on for quite some time. Then, finally, after probably 2 or 3 minutes of like a standoff, they all just walked away. When they were gone, I looked down the hallway and confirmed it. After that, they did not come back. I'm still left wondering what that was all about. Was it just a group of guys trying to scare people to be funny or something? I'm really not sure, but it was the weirdest thing that's ever happened in my time living here. I'm hoping that I never see those guys again.